Go ahead and get comfortable. Pull the blanket a little tighter, settle into whatever position feels best, and let the room get quiet around you. We're going to spend some time together tonight wandering through one of the strangest, most layered, most secretly emotional universes ever put on television. No sharp cuts, no jump scares, just facts, stories, mysteries, and tiny, beautiful details from across all of Rick and Morty. Some of these you may have heard before. Most of them you probably haven't. And all of them are worth sitting with slowly, the way you'd turn a strange coin over in your hand in the dark and wonder where it came from. We have a lot of ground to cover, and none of it needs to be rushed. Part 1. Where it all began. The origin story. Let's start at the very beginning. But because the beginning of Rick and Morty is actually one of the strangest creation stories in television history. And it starts not with a pitch meeting or a big studio deal, but with a joke that was too rude to show anyone. Fact 1. Before Rick and Morty existed at all, Justin Roiland made a short animated film called The Real Animated Adventures of Doc and Marty. It was a parody of Back to the Future, featuring crude caricatures of Doc Brown and Marty McFly. The humor was intentionally offensive. Roiland has described it as a kind of experiment in how far you could go before an audience walked away. The characters had early, rougher versions of the voices we now associate with Rick and Morty. It was never meant to be the seed of a television phenomenon. Yeah, it was just a strange little internet video that found an audience of people who appreciated exactly how weird it was. Fact 2. Justin Roiland made that short for Channel 101, a monthly short film festival in Los Angeles that was co-founded by Dan Harmon and a collaborator named Rob Schrab. Channel 101 worked on a simple, kind of brutal format. You submitted a 5-minute pilot, a live audience voted on which shows continued, and the ones that didn't get enough votes were canceled on the spot. Roiland had been submitting content to the festival since around 2004, and Harmon liked the specific texture of his humor, the way it leaned into chaos while still maintaining an odd, accidental warmth. Fact 3. Harmon and Roiland first met at Channel 101 when Roiland was still submitting content in 2004. Their collaboration didn't begin immediately, but the friendship formed over shared sensibilities and a mutual appreciation for science fiction that took big ideas completely seriously even when the surrounding context was completely ridiculous. Fact 4. In 2012, Adult Swim approached Dan Harmon to create a new animated series. Harmon had just come off a very turbulent period. He had been fired from Community, the NBC sitcom he created, and had then been rehired, creating one of the messiest public professional messes in television comedy history. When Adult Swim came calling, Harmon reached out to Roiland, and together they built something new using the DNA of those old Doc and Marty videos as a starting point. Fact 5. That here's a detail that sounds almost too good to be true but is completely verified. Harmon and Roiland wrote the entire first draft of the Rick and Morty pilot in a single day. Roiland, knowing Harmon's tendency to procrastinate, essentially locked him in his office and refused to let him leave until the script was finished. That office happened to be Harmon's unfurnished office at Community, which he had just been fired from at the time. The first draft was completed in roughly 6 hours. Fact 6. The original pitch for Rick and Morty to Adult Swim included the show's concept and the pilot script, and Adult Swim greenlit it almost immediately. The network had been looking for something that could capture a particular kind of audience: adult, science fiction curious, comfortable with dark humor, and Rick and Morty fit that space precisely. Fact 7. One of the earliest concerns Adult Swim had about the show was the idea of Justin Roiland voicing both Rick and Morty. The network was initially uncertain whether a single person could carry two central characters through a full series without the distinction between them blurring or becoming tiresome. To address this, Harmon wrote 4 separate story premises specifically designed to showcase Morty as a fully developed, assertive character capable of driving plots on his own terms. After reading those 4 premises, Adult Swim gave Roiland the green light to do both voices. Fact 8. Rick and Morty premiered on Adult Swim on December 2nd, 2013. The first episode was called Pilot, and it introduced the basic elements of the show with a kind of calm confidence: Rick's garage lab, the portal gun, Morty's family. The dynamic between a genius who didn't care about consequences and a teenager who couldn't stop caring about them. Almost immediately, the show found an audience that felt like it had been waiting for exactly this. Fact 9. The character names Rick and Morty are a deliberate nod to their Back to the Future inspirations. Doc Brown's first name is Emmett, but he goes by Doc, and the protagonist is Marty McFly. Rick is clearly Roiland's evolved version of the older genius figure, and Morty is the younger, more reactive companion. But Roiland and Harmon didn't want their characters to just be copies. Now, they added layers that Back to the Future never explored. What if the scientist was genuinely broken? What if the adventure always had a real cost? What if the teenager was slowly being damaged by everything he was experiencing? Fact 10. The show's original title stayed as Rick and Morty throughout development, which was slightly unusual. Most animated pilots go through a long process of name testing and focus groups. Adult Swim trusted the simplicity of it, and the decision proved wise. The name is extraordinarily easy to remember and has an almost rhythmic quality that makes it stick in the mind. Fact 11. Production of the animation itself is handled by a Canadian studio called Bardell Entertainment, based in Vancouver. Bardell has worked on a wide range of animated productions, including The Dragon Prince, Teen Titans Go, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Here is a delightful coincidence. The CEO of Bardell Entertainment is named Rick. Rick at Bardell producing Rick and Morty. Fact 12. The animation software used to bring Rick and Morty to life includes Toon Boom Harmony for the animation itself, Adobe After Effects for post-production work, and Adobe Photoshop for the background art. The process is a blend of traditional hand-drawn aesthetics with modern digital tools, which is part of why the show has a visual texture that feels both loose and precise at the same time. Fact 13. Justin Roiland has cited The Simpsons as a major influence on his visual style for the show. He has pointed out that the mouth shapes, the expressive eyes, and the general character proportions share DNA with The Simpsons, and has acknowledged that this is true of a whole generation of animators who grew up watching the show. He also credits John Kricfalusi's The Ren and Stimpy Show as another key reference. There's a specific small W-shaped mouth that Rick makes sometimes, which is a deliberate callback to the same expression Mom Ren from Ren and Stimpy frequently used. Fact 14. Dan Harmon has described Rick and Morty as a show that sits somewhere between The Simpsons and Futurama. It has the domestic family structure of The Simpsons, a household with a father, a mother, a son, a daughter, a visiting older relative, but it tilts the entire arrangement into science fiction, the way Futurama explored its future setting. The difference is that Rick and Morty takes the science fiction much more seriously than either of those shows did, treating it as more than backdrop. Fact 15. The show's writing room, by the standards of major television production, is extremely small. It has been described by Harmon himself as a very, very tiny little writer's room, with a lot of heavy lifting from everybody. Each episode starts with a general story discussion in the room before a single writer is assigned to produce an outline. Harmon and Roiland would then do what they called a pass on the outline before it went through multiple more drafts. Fact 16. The first 2 seasons of Rick and Morty had a writing staff that was predominantly male. Season 3 was the first gender-balanced writer's room in the show's history, and both Harmon and Roiland spoke publicly about how much the addition of female writers changed the creative energy in the room, and specifically credited them with helping develop stronger storylines for Beth and Summer. Fact 17. The theme music for Rick and Morty was not originally composed for the show. Composer Ryan Elder wrote the main theme for a different project, a rejected Cartoon Network pilot called Dogworld, which Roiland was developing around 2012. Dogworld was about a planet of intelligent dogs who had enslaved humans. When the Dogworld project collapsed, Roiland brought the theme with him into Rick and Morty. The show's second episode, Lawnmower Dog, is itself a repurposed piece of Dogworld material, and Rick even makes a joke at the end of that episode about wanting to see an 11-minute board-driven show about intelligent dogs, which is a very direct inside reference to what Dogworld was going to be. Fact 18. Roiland initially wanted each episode of Rick and Morty to be only 11 minutes long. Adult Swim pushed back and insisted on a full half-hour format. In retrospect, this was almost certainly the right call. So much of what makes the show feel complete and satisfying has to do with its willingness to breathe, to take a detour, to spend time in one place before the next portal opens. Fact 19. Before Rick and Morty, one of Roiland's most notable projects was a web series called House of Cosbys, which featured clones of Bill Cosby and ran for 5 episodes on Channel 101 before Cosby's lawyers sent a cease and desist letter and shut the whole thing down. Roiland has jokingly said that in a strange way, Bill Cosby is responsible for Rick and Morty existing, because the cease and desist forced Roiland to look for new creative outlets, which eventually led him to keep refining the characters and voices that would become Rick and Morty. Fact 20. The show premiered on Instagram before it premiered anywhere else in a somewhat unconventional promotion. In 2014, Adult Swim released an entire episode on Instagram. The catch was that at the time, Instagram had a strict 15-second video limit, which meant the episode had to be split into 109 separate videos for viewers to watch in sequence. Adult Swim themselves described this whole event as our latest frustrating exercise in audience engagement. Part 2. The Voices. How the show sounds. Let yourself sink a little deeper now. The voices in Rick and Morty are part of what makes the show feel alive in such a particular way. Let's explore what actually happens when those voices come to life. Fact 21. Justin Roiland voiced both Rick Sanchez and Morty Smith from the show's premiere in 2013 through the end of Season 6 in 2022. This means that for 9 years, the two central characters of the show, the genius grandfather and the anxious teenager, were the same person performing solo in a recording booth. Fact 22. Roiland's recording process for each episode was layered. He would begin by recording all of Morty's lines individually. Then he would record all of the conversations between Rick and Morty together. Then he would record Rick's conversations with other characters. And finally, he would record any remaining Rick lines that stood alone. The whole layered process of doing 2 distinct characters through a full episode was both technically complex and, by Roiland's own description, deeply enjoyable. He has said that voicing these characters on their worst days always managed to cheer him up. Fact 23. Rick's famous burp talking was not a sound effect or an exaggerated vocal tick that Roiland performed on demand. Roiland has explained in detail that he physically could not burp on command. So, before recording sessions, he would drink considerable amounts of low-calorie beer and water to generate the real, actual burps you hear in the show. The burps are entirely genuine. This is a fact that somehow makes Rick's burp mid-sentence delivery feel even stranger when you think about it. Fact 24. Roiland did a considerable amount of improvisation during recording sessions. The process worked like this. The scripted lines would be recorded first, and then Roiland would be given space to riff and improvise additional material, often with Harmon in the room throwing out suggestions and encouraging particular directions. The best improvised material would then be written into the script for the next draft. This meant the final recorded dialogue was essentially a collaborative blend of scripted intention and in-the-moment spontaneity. Fact 25. The famous opening animation of the show, with Rick and Morty fleeing various creatures while the haunting theme music plays, is deliberately designed to set an enormous range of tonal expectations in the space of about 90 seconds. There are cute alien creatures, there are genuinely terrifying creatures, there is Rick calmly pointing a weapon at his own grandson, there is what appears to be a tender moment that immediately cuts to chaos. And the whole thing is a kind of compressed promise of what the show intends to be. Fact 26, the voice of the butter robot. The small device that appears briefly to ask what its purpose is, and then is told to pass butter, and then stares off into the middle distance in quiet existential devastation, was created using a text-to-speech application. This was the same app Roiland had used when he temporarily lost his voice while working on Adventure Time, where he voiced the Earl of Lemongrab. Rather than recast the butter robot, they kept the app voice. It became one of the most memorable moments in the entire first season. Fact 27. Bryan Cranston, who was still working on Breaking Bad in 2013 when Rick and Morty was being cast, actually auditioned for the role of Jerry Smith, Morty's father. He did not get the part. The role went to Chris Parnell, formerly of Saturday Night Live. It is genuinely difficult to imagine the voice of Walter White coming out of Jerry's mouth, even accounting for Cranston's extensive experience playing dopey father figures in comedies. Fact 28. Summer Smith is voiced by Spencer Grammer, daughter of the actor Kelsey Grammer. Beth Smith is voiced by Sarah Chalk, best known for her years playing Dr. Elliot Reed on Scrubs. Chris Parnell, who plays Jerry, was a longtime cast member at Saturday Night Live. The supporting cast is rounded out by voices including Carrie Walgren, who plays Jessica, Morty's enduring crush. Fact 29. In January 2023, it was announced that Justin Roiland had been dismissed from Rick and Morty following serious personal legal matters. The show continued. Beginning with Season 7, Rick was recast with Ian Cardone, and Morty was recast with Harry Belden. The recasting was announced at San Diego Comic-Con 2023 and confirmed when the 7th season premiered in October of that year. The transition was handled with unusual care and transparency. Fact 30. Ian Cardone and Harry Belden, the new voices of Rick and Morty, have revealed in interviews that unlike Roiland's process, they record their lines completely separately from each other, in different studios, without any real-time interaction. The natural chemistry and back-and-forth energy between Rick and Morty that audiences perceive is entirely constructed in editing, which makes it even more striking that viewers often assume the two actors are in the same room. Belden has said he takes this assumption as a genuine compliment. Fact 31. As Cardone has also noted that the improvised quality of many Rick and Morty lines, the stammers, the tangents, the sudden shifts in mid-sentence, are now largely written into the script by the writing team rather than generated in the moment by the actor. The writers studied and analyzed the patterns of Roiland's improvisation so thoroughly that they can write dialogue that sounds spontaneous while being precisely planned. What sounds like someone losing track of their sentence has been carefully constructed to land in exactly the right place. Fact 32. Mr. Poopy Butthole, who initially voiced by Justin Roiland, was recast along with Rick and Morty in Season 7, with John Allen taking over the role. The character had become emotionally significant enough to viewers over the course of the series that the recasting was handled with considerable attention. Fact 33. The writing team for Rick and Morty, after every recording session, would go back and rewrite portions of the script to incorporate improvised material that had been generated during recording. This created a circular feedback loop between writing and performance that is relatively unusual in animated production, where scripts are typically much more fixed before voice actors enter the booth. Fact 34. Dan Harmon has a background as a podcaster and spoken word performer, in addition to being a screenwriter. He ran a podcast called Harmontown for years, which was essentially a live record of a weekly comedy show that he hosted in Los Angeles. While Harmontown gave Harmon a platform for extended, rambling philosophical monologues that feel deeply related to the kinds of speeches Rick delivers, both in structure and in the way they use humor as a bridge to something emotionally true. Fact 35. The show's storyboard artists have enormous creative influence over how scenes ultimately look and feel. Erica Hayes, one of the show's storyboard artists, was promoted to director during the later seasons of the show. Before working at Rick and Morty, she had been working as a coffee barista. Her story is one of the more remarkable creative arc stories connected to the show's production. Part 3. The characters, hidden layers and quiet details. Breathe slowly. Let your body get heavier. We're going deeper now into the characters themselves. The small things the show tells you about them without ever saying it out loud. Fact 36. Rick's full name is Richard Daniel Sanchez. The name Richard lends itself to Rick, which also carries an informal connotation of sharpness and cunning. The surname Sanchez is of Spanish origin, and Rick is canonically of Mexican descent. Though the show has never made a significant deal of this, it's simply part of who he is. Fact 37. Morty's full name is Mortimer Smith. This is also a deliberate echo of the Marty McFly inspiration. Both names begin with the same sound. Mortimer is a name with an archaic, slightly formal quality that sits oddly on a 14-year-old in a yellow shirt, which is perhaps part of why the show always shortens it. Fact 38. According to the show's internal lore, the reason Rick travels with Morty specifically is that Morty's brainwaves cancel out Rick's. Rick's intelligence generates a kind of brainwave signature that makes him detectable to various governmental and intergalactic entities. Morty's particular brainwave pattern, described as being at the opposite end of the spectrum from Rick's, effectively masks Rick's presence when they travel together. Rick needs Morty not just emotionally, but tactically. Fact 39. Rick has demonstrated throughout the show that he can transfer his consciousness into other bodies, create clones of himself, upload his mind to digital systems, and survive situations that would be instantly fatal to any normal person. That the show has never fully committed to whether Rick is technically immortal or simply extremely difficult to kill, and this ambiguity is clearly intentional. Fact 40. The episode Pickle Rick, Season 3, Episode 3, features Rick transforming himself into a literal pickle specifically to avoid attending family therapy. The therapist in that episode is Dr. Wong, voiced by Susan Sarandon, and she delivers what many fans consider the most accurate and devastating analysis of Rick's character anywhere in the show. She tells him that his genius doesn't make him special, it just gives him an unusually wide selection of escape routes from his own emotions. Rick's response to this insight is to compliment her and then completely ignore it. This exchange, despite being about a man who turned himself into a pickle, that contains more genuine psychological honesty than most actual dramas. Fact 41. Beth Smith's career as a horse surgeon, rather than a human surgeon, is the show's quiet way of communicating how she settled for something below her actual capabilities. The show has revealed that Beth had the potential and the intelligence to be a fully trained surgeon for humans, but a series of life choices, beginning with getting pregnant with Summer as a teenager, changed the trajectory of her career. She practices on horses because horse surgery doesn't require the same medical licensing and training as human surgery, and because she was able to work as a horse surgeon while managing a family. Fact 42. Jerry Smith's occupation is in advertising, which is a deliberate choice by the writers. And advertising is positioned in popular culture as a field for people who have a little creative aspiration, but not quite enough originality to do something truly creative. It's also a profession where mediocrity can be comfortably sustained for years. Jerry works in advertising because it perfectly captures his particular relationship with the world. Just enough aspiration to be dissatisfied, not quite enough talent to transcend it. Fact 43. Summer Smith's hair color, red, is the subject of a minor fan theory that has acquired a small amount of canonical weight. Jerry has brown hair and Beth has blonde hair, which means Summer's red hair doesn't obviously come from either parent. One fan theory proposed that this makes Summer either Rick's biological daughter or otherwise connected to Rick's genetics. Now, the show has never confirmed or denied this, but has occasionally acknowledged that Summer's hair color is unexplained. Fact 44. Rick's design, with his white spiky hair and the slight blue tinge to the tips, was influenced by a specific visual shorthand for brilliant, disheveled, older male scientists in cartoons. A kind of common ancestor shared with characters like Doc Brown, Professor Farnsworth from Futurama, and numerous others. Roiland has said that the white hair communicates age and experience instantly, while the slightly wild angle of it suggests chaos and freedom. Fact 45. Morty's yellow shirt is, according to Roiland, inspired by Bart Simpson's iconic red shirt. The decision to make it yellow rather than red was intentional. Yellow reads as slightly more timid, slightly more uncertain. She's slightly more likely to get mustard on it accidentally. Fact 46. Throughout the show, you can track Rick's emotional state through his drinking. In seasons where Rick is under the most psychological pressure, his drinking becomes more visible and more central. In moments of genuine connection with Morty or the family, Rick is occasionally seen without a drink in his hand, which is the show's understated visual way of suggesting that real connection is the one thing that can actually reach him. Fact 47. Mr. Meeseeks, the tall blue helper creatures who pop into existence when summoned from the Meeseeks box, are, according to Rick's in-show explanation, beings for whom existence is inherently painful. They were designed to appear, complete a task, and cease to exist as quickly as possible. Rick created them. The show never pauses on this. But the implication is extraordinary. Rick built a race of beings specifically engineered to experience suffering. and the only mercy he built into them was the ability to end that suffering by completing a goal. This is either one of the darkest things Rick has ever done or one of the most poignant, depending on how generously you read his intentions. Fact 48. Bird Person, Morty's grandfather's oldest and most trusted friend, is described as a freedom fighter who fought alongside Rick against the Galactic Federation. His real name in his native language translates to something like Bird Person, and Rick has always called him by his own people's name rather than using some Americanized version. So this small detail says something about Rick's relationship with Bird Person that most of Rick's other relationships don't have. A genuine respect for who Bird Person is rather than what Rick needs him to be. Fact 49. The character of Mr. Poopy Butthole was designed partly as a trap for the audience. When the Parasites episode first aired, the writers deliberately introduced him in a way that made it completely reasonable to assume he was a parasite. He had only happy, positive memories attached to him, which was the parasite's signature. They wrote his character and his backstory so carefully that even attentive viewers couldn't be certain. Then the show revealed that he was real, that he was an actual part of the Smith family's lives, and that Beth had just shot an innocent person out of perfectly understandable paranoia. The reversal is one of the show's most elegant structural feats. Fact 50. Evil Morty. The version of Morty who wears an eye patch manipulated the Citadel from within, became its president, and then destroyed it to escape the central finite curve. Is never actually called Evil Morty in the show itself. The name was given to him by fans on Reddit, and the creators liked it so much that they have used it informally. But in the actual text of the show, he is referred to as Candidate Morty, President Morty, or simply the Morty with the eye patch. Fact 51. The Galactic Federation, which serves as one of the show's most persistent antagonistic forces, is explicitly modeled on a kind of sci-fi version of oppressive governmental bureaucracy. Its uniforms, its hierarchy, its methods of control all draw from a long tradition of science fiction's critique of authoritarian systems, from Star Wars' Galactic Empire to the various federations and alliances in Star Trek that gradually become more sinister the more closely you examine them. Fact 52. Unity. The hive mind entity that Rick is revealed to have had a significant romantic relationship with in Season 2's autoerotic assimilation is voiced by Christina Hendricks. The episode is one of the most unexpectedly tender in the entire series. Rick's relationship with Unity is one of the few places in the show where you see what Rick might look like if he ever fully opened himself to another being. And the aftermath, with Rick alone in his garage, clearly devastated, is presented with almost no humor at all. Fact 53. Squanchy. The small cat-like alien who was part of Rick's old crew of rebel fighters uses the word squanch in a way that can mean almost anything depending on context. This is a running joke that satirizes the way certain words in real languages carry wildly different meanings depending on tone and circumstance. The word has been used to express excitement, agreement, affection, profanity, and philosophical uncertainty, sometimes in the same sentence. Fact 54. The character of Jessica, Morty's long-running crush, is used throughout the show as a kind of measuring stick for Morty's emotional growth and regression. In early seasons, she represents everything normal and desirable that Morty's adventures are pulling him away from. In later seasons, as Morty becomes more capable and more broken in equal measure, had his feelings for Jessica become more complicated. Less idealization, more genuine longing for the kind of ordinary connection he keeps almost having and then losing. Fact 55. Beth and Rick's relationship is described by Harmon as the emotional backbone of the series. Their dynamic, a daughter who was abandoned by her genius father, grew up in his absence, built a life that she resents in part because he wasn't there to guide her and then let him back into that life immediately when he returned, contains more unresolved grief and love than any other relationship in the show. And it almost never gets directly addressed. Most of what Rick and Beth feel for each other lives in silences, glances, and moments of muted tenderness that pass quickly because neither of them knows what to do with them. Fact 56. Jerry, while despite being the show's most consistently mocked character, has survived an extraordinary number of situations that should have been fatal. He survived on an alien planet without any particular skills or equipment. He has walked away from encounters that would have destroyed any version of Rick or Morty. He has been separated from his family, abducted by aliens, and subjected to various forms of psychological and physical suffering, and he keeps coming back. The show occasionally suggests that Jerry's absolute ordinariness is itself a kind of superpower. The universe doesn't bother killing him because he isn't interesting enough to be a meaningful target. Fact 57. The show has 3 characters who have directly and canonically broken the fourth wall. Rick, who has acknowledged being in a TV show on multiple occasions. Mr. Poopy Butthole, who speaks directly to the audience. And Morty, who in certain late-season moments seems to be looking somewhere beyond the scene. The show's relationship with self-awareness is carefully controlled. It can be invoked for humor or for poignancy, and the rules of when it applies shift based on what the story needs. Fact 58. Doofus Rick, the version of Rick from a dimension where he is profoundly unintelligent, is, by the show's own description, the only Rick across all dimensions who genuinely enjoys Jerry's company. He and Jerry formed a brief but apparently sincere friendship during an episode where Ricks from across the multiverse visited each other's dimensions. The other Ricks despise Doofus Rick. Jerry keeps a framed photo of him in the garage. This is confirmed as an Easter egg visible in multiple episodes if you look carefully. Fact 59. Rick's relationship to death is genuinely unusual even by the standards of the show. He has died multiple times across various dimensions and timelines. He has watched himself die, he has buried his own dead body, he has been in situations where death was certain and calmly calculated his way out. And yet the show has made clear that Rick is deeply afraid of something, not physical death exactly, but the idea of ceasing to matter, of becoming ordinary, of having his suffering amount to nothing. The thing that Rick fears is not dying. It is dying without having made it mean something. Fact 60. In the episode Total Recall, which features memory-altering parasites, the family discovers that the only way to identify the real characters from the fake ones is to find a bad memory of them. The episode is a meditation on how we construct personal history and what it means to trust someone. But buried inside it is a question about Rick. Why does the family have almost no good memories with Rick that aren't mixed with some form of pain? This is not a plot hole. It is a very deliberate character observation. Part 4. The Mythology. The deep lore, let the warmth settle over you now. We're going somewhere quieter. Into the long, slow threads of story that run underneath the show like something underground, only surfacing when the writers decide it's time. The mythology of Rick and Morty is one of the most carefully constructed in animated television, and most of it was invisible for years before it started to reveal itself. Fact 61. The designation C137 refers to the dimension from which our main Rick originates. Number 137 is not arbitrary. In physics, the fine structure constant is approximately equal to 1 over 137, and it represents the strength of the electromagnetic interaction between charged particles. It is one of the most important fundamental constants in quantum physics. Choosing 137 as Rick's home dimension number is a quiet wink at the audience. This is where the most important Rick comes from, and also a fundamental constant of the universe. Fact 62. For the first several seasons of the show, many viewers assumed that Rick C137 and Morty were from the same original dimension. Season 6 quietly clarified that this is not the case. Rick C137 comes from a dimension where his wife Diane and daughter Beth were murdered when Beth was a child. Now, that dimension never had a Summer or a Morty because Beth died before she could grow up and have children. Morty comes from a different dimension, the Cronenberg dimension that we see turned into a wasteland in Season 1. Rick and Morty are both refugees, each from their own devastated versions of home. Fact 63. Rick Prime, the version of Rick who serves as the overarching villain of the series, is a version of Rick from the Cronenberg dimension. He is the one who, decades before the series began, appeared in Rick C137's garage and offered him the portal gun technology. When Rick C137 refused, because at that time he had a family he loved and had no interest in abandoning them, Rick Prime took it personally and dropped a bomb through a portal into Rick C137's garage, killing both Diane and Beth. Then he disappeared into the multiverse. Fact 64. The murder of Diane and Beth is why Rick became the person we see at the start of the series. Rick C-137 spent decades hunting Rick Prime across the multiverse, killing other Ricks along the way because he couldn't find the right one. He eventually ended up in the Cronenberg dimension, which is actually Rick Prime's original home, and when Rick Prime abandoned it, Rick C-137 moved in and took his place. This is why our Rick is living with a version of Beth, who is not his original daughter. He chose to be with a version of Beth precisely because he couldn't be with the original one. Fact 65. Rick Prime's primary weapon against Rick C-137 was ultimately the Omega device, a piece of technology capable of erasing a person from every dimension simultaneously. Rick Prime used it on Diane. This is why Diane doesn't appear in the show at all. She has been erased not just from Rick C-137's dimension, but from every version of reality. The show never fully explains this in the first few seasons, but leaves enough quiet absence around Diane's memory that attentive viewers could tell something catastrophic had happened to her. Fact 66. Rick C-137 kept his original home dimension, Dimension C-137, where Diane and Beth died, on a time loop for decades. When he finally returned to it in Solarix, he found his neighbor had been trapped in the same day for years. As part of Rick's process of moving on, he dismantled the time loop and allowed the dimension to resume its natural flow, which meant allowing most of its inhabitants, including his trapped neighbor, to finally die. And it was an act of mercy that also required Rick to finally let go. Fact 67. The Citadel of Ricks is a civilization built by thousands of Rick variants from across the multiverse who wanted a society organized around their own supremacy. Our Rick is the only Rick who ever refused to join the Citadel voluntarily, which is part of why the Council of Ricks views him with such a mix of contempt and fear. He is the most dangerous Rick because he refuses to be part of the system. The show designates him as the Rickest Rick for this reason. He is the version of Rick who most completely embodies Rick's defining trait of total refusal to be controlled by any external authority. Fact 68. The central finite curve, introduced as a major concept in the Season 5 finale, is essentially a partition within the multiverse. It separates all the dimensions where Rick is the smartest being in the universe from all the dimensions where he isn't. The curve is described as being built by Ricks to ensure that their civilization always exists in a part of the multiverse where they are on top. Evil Morty's great achievement, and the climax of his arc, is breaking through the curve and escaping into the infinite dimensions beyond it, where Rick is not automatically the most powerful entity in the room. Fact 69. The portal gun technology, Rick's most iconic tool, is green. Most portals in the show are green, but when Evil Morty breaks through the central finite curve in the Season 5 finale, the portal he creates is yellow and golden. This color distinction is deliberately symbolic. Green portals operate within the curve, within the controlled part of the multiverse where Rick's rules apply. The yellow portal goes beyond that. It represents something genuinely unknown, a space where the show's existing power structures don't apply. Fact 70. The show revealed in Season 5 that the only Ricks who ever independently invented interdimensional travel are Rick C-137 and Rick Prime. Every other Rick in the multiverse received the portal gun technology from another Rick rather than inventing it themselves. This is significant because it means that of all the Ricks who exist, only 2 of them have the specific kind of genius required to build the fundamental tool that defines their civilization from scratch. And those 2 are each other's greatest enemies. Fact 71. Evil Morty's full backstory was kept deliberately vague for years. But when he first appeared in Season 1's Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind, he was simply a Morty who seemed to be manipulating an evil Rick. His identity, his history, and his motivations were all hidden. Over the course of several seasons, the show slowly revealed more about him, his political ambitions, his understanding of the Citadel's corrupt systems, his contempt for all Ricks, without ever fully explaining where he came from or why he became who he became. The mystery is partly the point. Fact 72. The show handles time travel with a kind of deliberate avoidance that it jokes about openly. Rick keeps a box labeled time travel stuff visible in his garage in multiple episodes, but has repeatedly stated his contempt for time travel as a narrative device. When the show has finally engaged with time travel, as in Season 4's Snake episode Rattlestar Ricklactica, it has done so with a kind of exhausted comic resignation, as if acknowledging that the device will eventually demand to be used. The box in the garage is the show's way of acknowledging the elephant in the room while keeping it contained. Fact 73. The Galactic Federation's uniform colors, their bureaucratic structure, and their aesthetic of polite, smiling oppression are all drawn from a tradition of science fiction. Totalitarianism that the show takes very seriously as a political statement. The Federation isn't evil in an obvious way. It's evil in the way that large systems are evil. It distributes power unevenly, rewards compliance, punishes independence, and maintains control through the comforting illusion that everything is fine. Fact 74. In A Wrinkle in Time, the Season 2 premiere, Rick, Morty, and Summer accidentally split time after Rick freezes it at the end of Season 1 to clean up after a party. The episode is built entirely around the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, the physics concept that states you cannot simultaneously know both the exact position and the exact momentum of a particle. By trying to navigate split timelines simultaneously, the characters experience a version of quantum uncertainty applied to their own existence. The cats floating around in the episode are a visual reference to Schrödinger's cat, the famous thought experiment about a cat that is simultaneously alive and dead until observed. Fact 75. That the microverse, the tiny universe Rick created inside a battery to power his car, is one of the show's most provocative ideas. Rick built an entire civilization of conscious beings, gave them energy generation as their main activity, and convinced them it was progress. The beings in the microverse created their own sub-universe called a miniverse, and the beings in that created a teenyverse. Each layer contains beings who don't know they're being used as power sources. This is presented as a comedy premise, but it's also an unresolved ethical horror that Rick never addresses. Fact 76. The Council of Ricks, the governing body of the Citadel before Evil Morty's presidency, is depicted as deeply corrupt, self-serving, and controlled by what the show calls a shadow council that operates even further behind the scenes. And the layers of shadow governance within the Citadel are a direct satire of real-world political systems and the way that visible power is often controlled by invisible power. Fact 77. Space Beth, the version of Beth who may or may not be the original Beth after Rick offered to clone her, represents one of the show's most unresolved narrative threads. Rick deliberately designed the situation so that neither he nor anyone else could determine which Beth was the original and which was the clone. The show has explicitly confirmed that even the writers didn't know which was which when they created the situation, suggesting the ambiguity is permanent. Both Beths are real. Both experiences are valid. The question of which one is the real Beth is one the show refuses to answer. Fact 78. But the Vindicators, a team of superhero-style intergalactic protectors who appear in Season 3, are an elaborate parody of both Avengers-style superhero teams and the idea that heroism can be performed as a brand. Rick despises the Vindicators because they take credit for adventures he helped them survive, and because they represent a version of heroism built on image rather than substance. The episode Vindicators 3: The Return of Worldender is in some ways a critique of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and in other ways a very dark meditation on what happens when the person who does the actual work never gets the acknowledgement. Fact 79. The show's ongoing theme of identity replacement, characters taking over the lives of their dead counterparts from other dimensions, is treated with remarkable gravity for a cartoon. When Rick and Morty buried their dead bodies in a backyard in Season 1 and moved into a new dimension, the show didn't minimize what that meant. Morty's horror at the act was allowed to last. The weight of it persisted through subsequent seasons. The show's willingness to let its characters carry real psychological damage from their experiences is part of what separates it from other animated comedies. Fact 80. The Ricklantis Mix-Up, Season 3, Episode 7, is widely considered one of the finest episodes of the entire series. It features no main plot involving Rick C-137 or Morty Prime. They are present only in the brief opening and closing scenes, off on an Atlantis adventure we never see. Now, the entire episode takes place inside the Citadel of Ricks and follows multiple storylines about ordinary Ricks and Mortys living in the Citadel's society. It ends with the reveal of evil Morty's election as president. The episode was written as a complete standalone that also functioned as a massive story development, and its tonal control, moving between comedy, social commentary, and genuine tragedy, is extraordinary. Part 5. Easter eggs and hidden details. Let yourself drift a little. This section is about small things, the tiny details that reward attention, the hidden jokes and references that were buried there for the most careful viewers to find years after the episode aired. Fact 81. In the very first episode of Rick and Morty, the interdimensional customs zone contains a Where's Waldo style shot filled with silhouettes of aliens from other science fiction properties. Visible among them are a prawn from the film District 9, a xenomorph from the Alien franchise, a Moonanite from Aqua Teen Hunger Force, silhouettes resembling characters from Mystery Science Theater 3000, and what appears to be an alien from the video game Space Invaders. It is an immediate signal to anyone paying attention. This show knows what it is, knows what came before it, and intends to engage with all of it. Fact 82. The Gravity Falls connection. Justin Roiland and Alex Hirsch, the creator of Gravity Falls, are close friends and planned a degree of cross-universe connectivity between their shows. In Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind, when Rick is being chased by other Ricks and opens multiple portals to confuse them, one of the portals spits out 3 specific objects: a notebook, a pen, and a coffee mug with a question mark on it. These are the exact items that Grunkle Stan loses through a portal in the Gravity Falls episode Society of the Blind Eye. The shows exist in the same multiverse, and the creators place this crossover there quietly for fans of both to find. Fact 83. In the Gravity Falls episode Big Trouble in Little Sanchez, a picture of the Gravity Falls villain Bill Cipher can be briefly seen on a monitor in the background while Beth and Jerry attend counseling. But Bill Cipher and Rick share some thematic similarities. Both are extraordinarily powerful entities who view other beings as tools and find existence entertaining rather than meaningful. Fact 84. The show contains numerous hidden references to Dan Harmon's previous series Community. In Autoerotic Assimilation, Rick asks the hive mind Unity to create a television show for him, which she produces as an alien version of the Community study group sitting around a table. Rick then cancels the show, recommissions it, and cancels it again. A direct reference to Community's notoriously turbulent production history, which included Harmon being fired and then rehired. Fact 85. Multiple actors from Community have voiced characters in Rick and Morty. John Oliver, who plays Professor Ian Duncan in Community, voiced the character Xenon Bloom in Anatomy Park. Keith David voices the President of the United States in multiple episodes and is also known for his role in Community. Fact 86. In Morty's Mind Blowers, if you look carefully at the archive room where Morty's erased memories are stored, you can find a bulb labeled Stanford, which is a reference to Stanford Pines, one of the main characters from Gravity Falls. Nearby is a bulb labeled Bill C., a reference to the Gravity Falls villain, Bill Cipher. Fact 87. The episode Total Recall contains a small piece of retroactive foreshadowing. At the end of Morty Night Run, the previous episode, Rick can be seen loading his spaceship's trunk with glowing green rocks. If you look closely, bright pink eggs are stuck to those rocks. Those eggs are the same parasite eggs that invade the Smith household in Total Recall. The parasites were already in the house before the episode about them even began. The writers planted the foreshadowing one full episode earlier for viewers who would only notice on a rewatch. Fact 88. Dan Harmon's production company vanity card at the end of each episode, called the Harmonious Claptrap card, quietly changed between seasons 2 and 3. In the first 2 seasons, the card shows a warm image of Harmon with his wife and their pets. After Harmon's divorce in 2015, the card was updated to show Harmon alone on a couch, surrounded by empty bottles and general disorder. This is not a joke inserted by anyone else. It is Harmon's own choice to let this real-life change be visible in his show, which says a great deal about his relationship with transparency and self-examination. Fact 89. In the Ricklantis mix-up, eagle-eyed viewers can spot a Rick in the background of the Citadel crowds who is dressed in the recognizable costume of a certain iconic British alien time traveler from a BBC science fiction institution. The show does not call attention to this, it is simply there for the fans who look. Fact 90. In Morty's Mind Blowers, if you play one of the clips from the Truth Tortoise scene backward, specifically the sounds that come from it, you can hear a message related to the Beatles. This is the kind of hidden audio gag that would only be discovered by viewers playing with the episode using digital editing tools. Fact 91. The show consistently places a small, pink and blue alien creature in the background of episodes that involve interdimensional travel. This creature appears in nearly every interdimensional sequence if you know to look for it. It has become one of the show's most beloved consistent background details, never acknowledged by any character, but always present. Fact 92. The episode 60 Minutes, the interdimensional cable episode, was generated through improvisation in a very particular way. The channels Rick and Morty flip through were written and performed as live improvisation during the recording session, with the writers and voice actors essentially riffing on absurd television concepts in real time. This is why the content of those channels has such a raw, unpredictable energy, because it largely was unpredictable at the time of recording. Fact 93. Rick's rock band, The Flesh Curtains, is referenced in Get Swifty when it's revealed that Rick played in a band alongside Birdperson and Squanchy. This is a tiny expansion of the world that suggests Rick had an entire life of friendship, rebellion, and creative expression before the events of the series, a life that the show reveals piece by piece without ever showing us all of it. Fact 94. The episode title Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind is a pun on the Steven Spielberg film Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Similarly, Something Ricked This Way Comes references Ray Bradbury's novel Something Wicked This Way Comes. The show's episode titles are consistently constructed puns and references, many of which reward recognition while still making complete sense as descriptions of the episodes they name. Fact 95. In Season 1, Episode 10, the post-credits scene shows Rick entering his bedroom, where Jerry has been sitting on his cot. Rick's bedroom is remarkably sparse, a small cot, very few personal items. This is the only glimpse the show offers early on into what Rick's private space looks like, and its emptiness is a visual statement about how little Rick has allowed himself to accumulate in the way of personal comfort. He keeps a minimal footprint because he's always prepared to leave. Fact 96. The show has a recurring visual gag where cracks in the Smith family house that were caused by significant events are never fully repaired. When the house was teleported in the Season 1 finale, the driveway cracked. Now that crack remains visible in subsequent episodes. Summer accidentally blows a hole in the garage roof in Season 2, Episode 9, and in the following episode it's patched over roughly with what appears to be duct tape and board. These small details of imperfect repair accumulate into a portrait of a household that gets through things by just barely dealing with them and moving on. Fact 97. The name Wooba Luba Dub Dub, Rick's famous nonsense exclamation, was originally conceived as a parody of meaningless catchphrases in animated shows. The joke was that it was deliberately vacuous, a placeholder for expression rather than actual expression. The show later revealed in Season 1 that in Birdperson's language, Wubba Luba Dub Dub actually means, "I am in great pain, please help me." This turned the joke into something devastatingly sad. The catchphrase Rick invented to mock catchphrases turned out to be a secret admission of suffering. Roiland has said in interviews that he found the original catchphrase annoying very quickly after creating it, which makes the dark translation feel like the show writing its own escape from a phrase that had already overstayed its welcome. Fact 98. Rick and Morty made a guest appearance in the couch gag of the final episode of The Simpsons' 26th season in 2015. The animated segment featured Rick and Morty accidentally killing the entire Simpsons family, and then attempting to clone them back to life with increasingly imperfect results. The crossover was a significant piece of cultural acknowledgement. The Simpsons choosing Rick and Morty for their couch gag was a passing of a particular kind of animated cultural baton. Fact 99. The Rick and Morty universe has a confirmed connection to the video game Pocket Mortys, an official mobile game produced to accompany the show. In the game, Rick C123 and his Morty navigate a Pokemon-style world involving the Citadel. The game contains lore details that expand on the show's world without directly contradicting it. Fact 100. Fast food chain Carl's Jr. released a television commercial in 2015 in which Rick brings sentient, walking Carl's Jr. burgers into Morty's room while Morty is sleeping. This was presumably the first and only time a television commercial has featured a character from an adult animated comedy apparently sneaking into a sleeping teenager's bedroom to place sentient food items beside him. Part 6. The Science. What's real? Settle in now. This section is slower, quieter, but the science that sits inside Rick and Morty is genuinely fascinating, and a lot of it is more accurate than you might expect from a show where the protagonist regularly turns himself into condiments. Fact 101. The multiverse concept at the heart of Rick and Morty is based on what physicists call the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, first formally proposed by physicist Hugh Everett in 1957. The interpretation suggests that every quantum event, every moment where a particle could go one way or another, causes the universe to split into separate branches where each possibility is realized. The show takes this quite seriously, treating the multiverse as infinite but structured, rather than entirely chaotic. Fact 102. In real quantum physics, the debate about the many worlds interpretation is unresolved. It is one of several competing interpretations of what happens when quantum systems are observed or measured. Some physicists find it elegant and compelling. Others consider it unfalsifiable and therefore not truly scientific. Columbia University physicist Brian Greene has proposed models involving at least 9 different types of multiverse. MIT physicist Max Tegmark has suggested up to 4. The show's specific version of an infinite multiverse is not scientifically disproved. It simply cannot yet be proved. Fact 103. Adult Swim once described Rick and Morty as our most scientifically accurate animated comedy, which is either genuinely true when evaluated against other animated comedies, or an extraordinary piece of comedic overstatement, or possibly both. Fact 104. The Season 2 premiere episode A Wrinkle in Time is built around the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, which in quantum mechanics states that you cannot know both the exact position and the exact momentum of a particle simultaneously. In the episode, Rick, Morty, and Summer accidentally split time into multiple parallel streams by making decisions while outside of normal time flow, which the show treats as an applied quantum mechanics problem. Measuring their position in time destabilizes their momentum through it. Fact 105. Schrödinger's cat, the famous thought experiment where a cat in a sealed box with a radioactive trigger is simultaneously alive and dead until someone opens the box and observes it, appears as a visual joke in A Wrinkle in Time. As the fractured timelines multiply and become increasingly unstable, cats float through multiple scenes, anchored to nothing and resolving into nothing, a visual representation of unresolved quantum states. Fact 106. Rick's portal gun, as a real-world concept, would require energy on an almost incomprehensible scale to operate. Creating a wormhole between 2 points in space-time, even theoretically, requires what physicists describe as exotic matter, with negative energy density, which has never been observed or created. The portal gun is not possible with any currently known physics. But the concept of wormholes is genuinely within the framework of general relativity. Einstein's equations allow for them mathematically. They just turn out to require physics that we do not currently have access to. Fact 107. The episode M, On Night Shame Aliens, features a simulation. Within a simulation within a simulation. A premise that draws from philosophical questions about whether we might already be living inside a simulation. This is sometimes called the simulation hypothesis, and it has been discussed seriously by physicists and philosophers including Elon Musk, Nick Bostrom, and others. The show uses the premise for comedy but treats the underlying idea with genuine respect for its disorienting implications. Fact 108. Rick's explanation of dark matter in the show's universe diverges considerably from actual physics, but the term is real. In actual cosmology, dark matter is matter that does not interact with the electromagnetic field. It doesn't absorb, emit, or reflect light, but is known to exist through its gravitational effects on visible matter. And it makes up approximately 27% of the universe's total mass energy content, but has never been directly observed. Rick's concentrated dark matter as a fuel source is science fiction, but the underlying term points to one of the genuine great mysteries of real physics. Fact 109. The concept of cloning, abadibakueyai, which Rick engages in casually and repeatedly throughout the series, is based on real biological processes. Human therapeutic cloning remains ethically contested and is banned in many jurisdictions, but animal cloning has been successfully accomplished since Dolly the sheep was cloned in 1996. The show's portrayal of cloning as trivially easy is an exaggeration, but it is an exaggeration of something real. Fact 110. Brain-computer interface technology, which appears in various forms throughout the show, from neural implants to consciousness transfers, is an active area of real research. Companies including Neuralink have been developing actual brain-computer interfaces for medical applications. The show's portrayal of consciousness as something that can be uploaded, transferred, and duplicated is not currently possible, but is not considered impossible in principle by most neuroscientists who debate the question intensely. Fact 111. Genetic engineering, used in Rick and Morty for everything from love potions to biological weapons to the Cronenberg transformation, is a real and rapidly advancing field. CRISPR gene editing technology, which allows precise modifications to DNA sequences, has transformed the possibilities of genetic medicine since its development in the early 2000s. The show's genetic chaos, while vastly exaggerated, draws from genuine anxieties about where genetic technology could go if developed without ethical constraints. Fact 112. The Microverse episode, Omrewenma, in which Rick reveals that his car battery is powered by a miniature universe, touches on a genuine philosophical problem called the Boltzmann brain paradox, which asks whether, given infinite time and a large enough universe, a conscious entity could randomly assemble itself from chaos, experiencing a momentary perception of reality before dispersing again. The Microverse asks a related question. If you are unaware that your civilization exists to power someone's car battery, does the meaning of your civilization change? Fact 113. The fine structure constant, approximately 1 over 137, is described by physicist Richard Feynman as one of the greatest mysteries of physics. It appears to be a fundamental constant of nature, meaning it cannot be derived from other constants, and has no obvious theoretical explanation for its specific value. Physicists have noticed that slight changes to its value would make chemistry and thus life impossible. The choice of C137 as Rick's home dimension is likely a nod to this constant. Rick, the most important Rick, comes from the dimension named after the most mysterious number in physics. Fact 114. The show's treatment of memory, including Rick's ability to erase Morty's memories and store them in a cabinet in Morty's Mind Blowers, engages with genuine neuroscience debates about memory consolidation, false memory, and the degree to which identity is constituted by continuous memory. When Morty discovers that he has had years of experiences erased, the philosophical question the show is raising is real. If you have no memory of having experienced something, did that experience shape who you are? And if it did, do you have a right to know? Fact 115. Telekinesis, which appears in various forms in the show, is not considered scientifically plausible by mainstream physics. However, the show treats it as a consequence of advanced technology or biology rather than as a supernatural phenomenon, which keeps it within the internal logic of a universe where the laws of physics are more complete and complex than our current understanding. Part 7. Fan theories that changed everything. The room is very quiet now. I'd let this section be the one you listen to with your eyes already closed. The slow unfolding of ideas that the show planted, and the fan community grew into something the show itself eventually had to reckon with. Fact 116. One of the oldest and most persistent fan theories about Rick and Morty holds that Rick is actually an older version of Morty from the future, that the two of them are the same person at different points in time, and the entire dynamic of their relationship is a genius from the future trying to relive his lost youth through a version of himself that hasn't been ruined yet. The show has never confirmed or denied this theory directly, and has occasionally seemed to lay breadcrumbs in its general direction. Fact 117 in the Flash Theory. In the very first episode, Rick's apparent fondness for the contents of his flask draws attention. He is described as a genius and a drunk. A prominent fan theory proposes that what Rick drinks from his flask is not alcohol, but a distilled version of the megatree seeds from the same episode. In the pilot, Morty swallows the seeds and temporarily becomes vastly more intelligent. The theory suggests that Rick discovered how to process these seeds into a drinkable form that grants sustained intelligence while suppressing the worst side effects, and that this is his actual secret, not natural genius, but chemically augmented intelligence. Evidence. The slight drool that Rick and Morty both display after consuming related substances, the show's refusal to confirm what's in the flask, and the fact that doofus Rick, who presumably never accessed the seeds, is the only noticeably less intelligent Rick. Fact 118. When asked about the contents of Rick's flask at a 2016 Comic-Con panel, Justin Roiland said, "I think he's just a connoisseur of all good liqueur." But during a separate Reddit AMA, when asked the same question, he said, "We're not ready to discuss the contents of Rick's flask yet." These two answers are not the same answer, and the second one implies that the flask has a canon answer that the creators are deliberately withholding. Fact 119. The Simulation Theory. Following the events of Emp's Night Shame Aliens, in which Rick escapes a simulation by outwitting an alien species trying to steal his dark matter formula, as some fans propose that Rick and Jerry never actually escaped the final simulation, that they have been inside it ever since, and everything that happened after that episode is still artificial. The show has neither confirmed nor denied this, which is very much in keeping with its philosophy of leaving certain possibilities unresolved. Fact 120, the Wrong Jerry Theory. In the episode Morty Night Run, Rick and Morty drop Jerry off at a daycare center for Jerrys from across the multiverse called Jerry Bory. At the end of the episode, they pick up a Jerry. The theory states that they picked up the wrong Jerry, that their original Jerry stayed at Jerry Bory, and the Jerry who has been in the Smith household since that episode is a slightly different version from a parallel dimension. The show has never specifically addressed whether this is true, and several small details in subsequent episodes can be read either as evidence for or against the theory, depending on how charitably you interpret Jerry's behavior. Fact 121. The Rick is aware he's on television theory. Throughout Season 1 especially, Rick displays behaviors that are unusual even for an unusually self-aware character. He attempts to coin catchphrases in a way that feels performative rather than spontaneous. He seems aware of narrative beats and acts accordingly. He has broken the fourth wall occasionally across multiple seasons. A sustained fan theory proposes that Rick is fully conscious that he is a fictional character in a television show, and that this knowledge is part of what makes him so nihilistic. He knows nothing. He has lasting consequences because all of it can be overwritten by a writer's room. Fact 122. The evil Morty is the original Morty theory. This is perhaps the most emotionally resonant fan theory the show has generated, and elements of it appear to have influenced the show's later canon. The theory holds that evil Morty was the first Morty that Rick C-137 ever traveled with, the original Morty from before the series began, who was left behind on a hostile alien planet when Rick jumped through a portal without him. The opening credits sequence briefly shows Rick abandoning a Morty to frog-like creatures. This Morty, the theory goes, survived, built his own portal gun, and spent years developing the intelligence, cunning, and rage that made him into the being capable of dismantling the Citadel. Season 5 and 6 partially address this theory without fully confirming it. Fact 123. Summer's hair and intelligence theory. Some fans have proposed that Summer is actually the most naturally intelligent member of the Smith family, and that her apparent ordinariness is a performance. The evidence is in Morty's Mind Blowers, in which it's revealed that Summer has learned over the years how to restore Rick and Morty after they accidentally wipe their own memories doing Mind Blowers. Because this has happened so many times, she could set the reset process up from muscle memory. She knows the procedure without being told. This implies she's been paying much closer attention to Rick's methods than anyone gives her credit for. Fact 124, The Talking Cat. But Season 4, Episode 4 features a talking cat, voiced by Matthew Broderick, who refuses to explain why he can talk, saying only that no answer would be satisfying. Rick mind scans the cat to find the true explanation and is so horrified by what he sees that he destroys the footage immediately. The episode ends with neither the audience nor the other characters ever learning the answer. Fan theories have proposed everything from the cat being a disguised villain, to it being a manifestation of nihilism given physical form, to it being directly connected to Gravity Falls' Bill Cipher, whose eyes appear to share a design with the guys. The show has explicitly framed the talking cat as a meta-commentary about the dangers of demanding explanations for things that are better left mysterious. But that hasn't stopped anyone from theorizing. Fact 125. The secret about the show. Early in production, Justin Roiland and some members of the creative staff agreed on a specific secret about the show's world, something that would never be directly revealed during the show's run, but would have clues planted throughout. Roiland acknowledged publicly that a fan on Reddit figured out the secret and posted it. He didn't confirm what the secret was, but the timing of his comments and the Reddit posts that preceded them have led many fans to believe the secret is either that Rick is aware he's in a television show, or that Rick is an older version of Morty. Fact 126. Rick Prime's true motivation, beyond the obvious sadism of killing Diane and Beth, is presented in the show as partly a kind of test, where Rick Prime seemed to believe that any Rick who chose family over adventure was wasting his potential. By destroying Rick C-137's family, Rick Prime was effectively forcing his counterpart to become what Rick Prime thought he should have always been: an unfettered, unattached genius with no emotional vulnerabilities. He didn't destroy Rick C-137's life purely out of cruelty. He did it because he was certain it would make C-137 better. This is a kind of evil that is arguably worse than simple malice. Fact 127. The Diane AI Theory. Rick created an artificial intelligence with his wife Diane's voice and installed it in his old home in Dimension C-137, programmed to sound like she was always just in the next room calling out to him. Fans have discussed this detail extensively as evidence that Rick's grief, while buried under decades of nihilism and armor, has never actually diminished. He kept a version of her voice waiting for him at home. He never fully let go. When he finally returned to C-137 in Solarix and chose to dismantle the AI and move on, it was the most genuinely moving moment in the show's entire run for many viewers. A man finally saying goodbye to the thing he'd been holding onto longer than he could afford to. Fact 128. Rick's garage being connected to a secret lab beneath the house is a detail introduced very early in the show. The method of accessing the lab has varied slightly across seasons, but one of the most discussed Easter egg versions involves the dead flies. In Season 3, there is a shot of Summer attempting to find a way into the garage's secret lab by arranging dead flies in a specific pattern on the floor. Rick subsequently subtly realigns the flies to the correct position, causing the garage floor to split and reveal the entrance. This is one of the most quietly bizarre methods of biometric security, say, in the entire show. Fact 129. Beth and Space Beth's dynamic in later seasons explores a question the show has circled around since its beginning. Which version of a person is the real one? Space Beth has had adventures and experiences that Beth has not had. She has changed in ways that Beth hasn't. But Beth has also continued to live, grow, and change in her own context. The show refuses to privilege either version of Beth's existence, suggesting that identity is constituted by experience and choice, rather than by original biological priority. Fact 130. On the question of which Rick is the Rickest Rick, a designation that carries enormous weight in the Citadel's hierarchy, is discussed in the show as being essentially a matter of perspective. Rick Prime, who built Portal technology himself, could claim the title. Rick C-137, who also built it independently and who is the only Rick to have ever refused the Sigil's authority, could claim it. The show's framing suggests that being the Rickest Rick has less to do with intelligence and more to do with the choice to remain a complete individual, to refuse to be defined by others' expectations of what a Rick should be. Part 8. Cultural Impact and Real-World Moments. Now we're in the territory of what the show did to the world outside itself. This is where the story becomes as strange as any episode. Fact 131. By 2021, Rick and Morty had more than 150 global licensees. These were companies across the world with official permission to produce merchandise in the show's image. The licensees covered fashion, accessories, home goods, toys, games, and food products. The show had become, in Justin Roiland's own words, his lifelong fantasy, a franchise with actual toys. He had once said that if he could create a franchise that generated action figures, he could consider his life complete. Fact 132. Rick and Morty airs in more than 110 countries and has been dubbed in 26 languages. The fact that a show built on extremely specific American pop culture references, dark philosophical humor, and the deeply particular rhythms of Los Angeles comedy writing has found enormous audiences in countries across Europe, Asia, and South America is something that neither the creators nor Adult Swim fully anticipated. Fact 133. Rick and Morty won the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program in both 2018 and 2020. In the context of Emmy history, winning in this category is difficult for adult animation. The category is frequently dominated by more family-friendly or critically established shows. Rick and Morty's wins were evidence that the show had crossed a threshold from cult success into mainstream critical recognition. Fact 134. The show was cable television's #1 comedy in 2019, measured by total viewership across all adult demographics. This placed it ahead of programs on networks with vastly larger reach than Adult Swim, which is a late-night cable block. The numbers required to achieve that ranking with a late-night cable animated show required extraordinary repeat viewing and streaming numbers that were unlike almost anything that had come before it. Fact 135. The Szechuan Sauce Incident. In Season 3, Episode 1, The Rick Shank Rickdemption, Rick delivers a monologue in which he reveals that his entire motivation for escaping from Galactic Federation custody wasn't about his family or his principles. It was about a discontinued McDonald's dipping sauce from 1998, created as a promotional tie-in for the Disney film Mulan that he remembered as being extraordinarily good. He called it his one-armed man, his obsession, his driving force, the only real thing in the universe that mattered to him. That's my series arc, Morty. And if it takes 9 seasons. The joke was designed as a parody of Rick's nihilism and an absurdist subversion of the episode's climax. Fact 136. McDonald's responded to the cultural moment caused by the Szechuan sauce reference by sending a personal jug of the sauce to Justin Roiland at the Rick and Morty writers' room, accompanied by an in-universe note. The writers were delighted. McDonald's then announced a one-day re-release of the sauce on October 7th, 2017, at select locations. Fact 137. What happened on October 7th, 2017 at McDonald's locations across the United States is one of the stranger documented fan behavior events in recent pop culture history. Fans arrived at McDonald's by the hundreds at individual locations. Many came in costume. Lines extended out of buildings and around blocks. McDonald's had profoundly underestimated how much sauce would be needed. Supplies were exhausted at many locations within minutes of opening. Angry fans began confronting employees. Police were called to multiple locations. Single packets of the sauce began appearing on eBay, where they sold for hundreds of dollars. One 3-pack sold for $848. The creators distanced themselves immediately from the chaos. Fact 138. McDonald's issued an apology following the October 7th incident and promised a wider re-release in February 2018, with significantly more supply. The February re-release went considerably more smoothly. McDonald's also produced a podcast specifically to apologize for the October situation, which has since been taken down. While the Szechuan sauce incident remains one of the most documented examples of a fan community collectively treating a fictional character's preference as a sincere cultural obligation. Fact 139. Pickle Rick. The Season 3 episode in which Rick spends the entire episode as a literal pickle, including navigating a government facility by surgically connecting himself to a cockroach and then a rat using only the tools available in a sewer, became one of the most quoted and recognizable cultural touchstones from the show's entire run within days of its broadcast. The phrase, "I'm Pickle Rick," became immediately ubiquitous in a way that surprised even the show's creators. Adult Swim was reportedly producing Pickle Rick merchandise within minutes of the episode's conclusion. Fact 140. The Season 3 premiere, The Rick Shank Rickdemption, was aired without announcement on April Fool's Day, 2017. Adult Swim looped the episode for the entire day without any prior notification to viewers. The unannounced release was partially strategic. It was designed to reward the show's most dedicated viewers, who had been waiting over a year for new content, and partially an expression of the show's relationship with its audience, which is built on subverting expectations. Fact 141. The gap between Seasons 1 and 2 of Rick and Morty was approximately 15 months. The gap between Seasons 2 and 3 was approximately 18 months. The gap between Seasons 3 and 4 was over 2 years. During these waiting periods, the fan community generated extraordinary amounts of fan art, fan fiction, analysis, and theorizing. And some of this theorizing directly influenced the show's later direction. The long waits between seasons created a specific kind of fan culture built on the assumption that every detail mattered and nothing was accidental. Fact 142. In May 2018, after what were described as prolonged and complicated contract negotiations, Adult Swim announced a 70-episode deal with Rick and Morty's creators. This was one of the largest episode orders in animated television history, essentially securing the show through Season 10. In January 2024, the show was renewed through Season 12, extending the mandate even further. Fact 143. The Writers Guild of America strike in 2023 affected the production schedule of Rick and Morty. Season 8 was delayed as a result. Dan Harmon was vocal in his support of the strike action. And this marked the first time that a major production event in the real world had visible, publicly acknowledged effects on Rick and Morty's release schedule. Fact 144. Rick and Morty has inspired an official cookbook. The cookbook, published under official license, includes recipes based on the show's fictional foods and places, presented with the show's particular brand of dark humor and in-universe explanations. It is one of the more unusual pieces of official merchandise in the franchise's history. Fact 145. The show's online fandom includes several long-running communities on Reddit and Discord, dedicated to theory development, episode analysis, and creative work inspired by the show. The Rick and Morty subreddit has been, at various points, one of the largest active fan communities for any animated television series. Now, its relationship with the show's creators has been mixed. Moments of genuine creative feedback have been followed by incidents that led the creators to publicly distance themselves from certain fan behaviors. Fact 146. Rick and Morty has been the subject of serious academic analysis. Philosophy papers have been published examining the show's relationship with nihilism, optimistic nihilism, Nietzsche's philosophy of the Übermensch, existentialist literature, and the ethics of Rick's treatment of other beings. There is at least one book dedicated entirely to the philosophy of Rick and Morty. The show has been discussed in university courses on ethics, narrative theory, and contemporary popular culture. Fact 147. The show's crossover with professional wrestling occurred when WWE star CM Punk appeared in an official Rick and Morty promotional piece, which was in turn referenced in wrestling programming. Rick and Morty has appeared in advertising and promotional material for a remarkable range of brands and entertainment properties, a testament to how broadly its cultural signifiers have spread. Fact 148. A Rick and Morty anime series was announced and began development as a separate production from the main show. The anime version, produced in Japan with a separate animation style, represented an experiment in expanding the franchise into a very different aesthetic tradition while maintaining the core characters and concepts. Fact 149. The show's merchandise revenue has been described by industry analysts as generating hundreds of millions of dollars across the franchise's lifetime. This figure includes not just direct sales of official merchandise, but licensing revenue from the approximately 150 global partners who produce Rick and Morty products. For a show that started as a very small, deliberately weird cartoon on a late-night cable block, the scale of this commercial success is genuinely extraordinary. Fact 150. The Rickmobile, a large Rick-shaped vehicle that toured the United States in promotional capacity, became one of the show's most widely photographed pieces of merchandise. Lines for the Rickmobile at Comic-Con events and mall appearances demonstrated the degree to which the show's visual design had become immediately recognizable and genuinely beloved as an aesthetic object. Part 9. Dan Harmon's story circle and the show's philosophy. Let this section be like a quiet light in the room. We're going somewhere more contemplative now, into what the show is actually about beneath the jokes and the portals, and the method that produces it. Fact 151. Dan Harmon developed what he calls the story circle in the late 1990s, when he was working on the Channel 101 festival and needed a framework that could help filmmakers tell a complete story in 5 minutes or less. He based it on Joseph Campbell's famous concept of the hero's journey, which Campbell published in 1949 as a universal structure underlying myths across human cultures. Harmon simplified Campbell's 11-stage structure into 8 steps that he arranged in a circle. Fact 152. The 8 steps of the story circle are: the character exists in a zone of comfort. They want something. They enter an unfamiliar situation in pursuit of it. They adapt to that situation. They get what they wanted. They pay a price for it. They return to their familiar situation. They have changed. The circle is exactly that. The character ends where they began, but they are different. The journey changes them and brings them back. Fact 153. Harmon has described the story circle as his attempt to remove all the hard and repeated work from the task of breaking a story. It's a tool, not a formula, a way of testing whether a given story has the fundamental shape of a complete human experience. Not every Rick and Morty episode follows it mechanically, but most of them follow it emotionally. Fact 154. Harmon believes that storytelling is biologically necessary to human beings, that the need to hear and tell stories is as fundamental to human survival as the need to eat or breathe. In his Story Circle video, he says, "Behind and beneath your culture-creating forebrain, there is an older, simpler monkey brain with a lot less to say and a much louder voice. One of the few things it's telling you, over and over again, is that you need to go search, find, take, and return with change. Stories are the form that human experience takes when it needs to be communicated." Fact 155. Season 4, Episode 6. Never Rick and Morty is a meta-episode set aboard a literal story train, a piece of Citadel merchandise that generates stories. The train's track is designed in the shape of the story circle. Rick spends the episode trying to escape the train by understanding and subverting its narrative structure. This is one of the most explicit fourth-wall engagements the show has ever done, using the episode's setting to comment directly on the method that produced it. Fact 156. Rick and Morty's relationship with nihilism, the philosophical position that life has no intrinsic meaning, is more nuanced than the show's surface-level presentation suggests. Rick regularly states that nothing matters and that the universe is cold and indifferent. But the show consistently treats Rick's nihilism as a coping mechanism rather than as a demonstrated truth. The fact that Rick returns to his family, that he maintains his relationship with Morty, that he kept an AI of his dead wife's voice active for decades. All of this suggests that Rick doesn't actually believe what he says. He behaves as if things matter enormously while performing the belief that nothing does. Fact 157. Dan Harmon has spoken publicly about his own struggles with depression, substance issues, and difficulty maintaining relationships. Rick Sanchez is widely understood to be a heavily exaggerated version of Harmon himself. The alcoholism, the genius, the self-destructive tendencies, the difficulty accepting love, the tendency to alienate people by being too harsh, too right, too unable to be gentle. When Dr. I Wong in Pickle Rick tells Rick that his intelligence is an elaborate escape mechanism, Harmon has indicated in various contexts that he wrote that speech partly about himself. Fact 158. The show has been described by scholars as representing optimistic nihilism, a philosophical stance that acknowledges the lack of inherent meaning in the universe while proposing that this absence is freeing rather than devastating. Without predetermined meaning, we are free to create our own. The show's emotional argument, buried under layers of irony and dark comedy, is that relationships matter precisely because they're not cosmically mandated. We choose them, and that choice is the only meaning there is. Fact 159. Justin Roiland said in a 2017 interview, "I think people sometimes mistake that for pure nihilism or toxic dark comedy, but there's a way to do it with a purpose. This is a deliberate defense of the show's emotional architecture. The argument that using darkness and nihilistic philosophy as narrative tools is not the same as endorsing nihilism as a life philosophy." Fact 160. The Matthew Bulger of the Humanist Journal noted that Rick and Morty's creators seem to communicate through the show a message that we need to focus on human relationships and avoid preoccupying our minds with unanswerable questions in order to find purpose. This is a reading that would make Rick himself furious, which is probably the point. Rick won't take his own show's advice, but the show is giving it anyway. Fact 161. Dan Harmon described Rick and Morty's structure as combining The Simpsons' domestic family comedy with Futurama's science fiction ambition, while being driven primarily by British-style storytelling rather than American family television conventions. British science fiction, Harmon has said, tends to take its premises more seriously and follow them to darker, more truthful conclusions than American genre television typically does. Doctor Who and The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy are specifically cited influences. Fact 162. Eric Armstrong of The New Republic wrote that Morty represents the audience, mostly there to react to Rick's deranged schemes. This is an accurate description of Morty's structural function mod early in the show, but the series gradually subverts it. Morty stops being purely a surrogate for the audience and becomes his own character with his own damage and his own arc. The show is aware of this transition and uses it deliberately. Fact 163. The show's balance between self-contained episodes and overarching continuity is something the creators have navigated carefully. Early seasons deliberately avoided too much serialization. Harmon was worried about repeating the experience of Community, which became progressively more difficult to enter as a new viewer as its inside jokes accumulated. Seasons 3 and onward introduced more explicit continuity, confident that the show had built enough audience loyalty to support it. Fact 164. The show's creative writing team has produced alumni who went on to significant work elsewhere in film and television. Michael Waldron, a Rick and Morty writer, went on to write the Marvel Studios films and series Loki, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, Avengers, Doomsday, and Avengers, Secret Wars. Yet he has said publicly that he and his colleagues are cashing in on our Rick and Morty street cred in those rooms. Jeff Loveness wrote for Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania. Mike McMahon went on to create Star Trek Lower Decks. Rick and Morty's writer's room is now understood as one of the most productive training grounds for ambitious speculative fiction writing in recent American television history. Fact 165. The show's production company is called Harmonious Claptrap, Harmon's company, alongside Justin Roiland's Solo Vanity Card Productions. Even in the names of their companies, both creators were winking at their audience. Claptrap is a mild insult for nonsense, and Harmon was naming his company after the idea that what he produces is elaborate, deliberately absurd, secretly sincere nonsense. Solo Vanity Card is a reference to the fact that vanity cards at the end of television shows are traditionally just a logo, and Roiland, who was doing both voices, producing, writing, and directing, wanted his to acknowledge the solitary scale of his contribution. Part 10. Mysteries Still Unsolved. We are almost at the end now. This final section is the slowest, the most open. These are the questions that remain. the things the show has planted and not answered, the doors it left cracked rather than open. Fact 166. The show's secret. Early in production, Roiland and members of the creative team agreed on a specific secret about the world of Rick and Morty, something they would never directly confirm during the show's run, but would place clues about. Roiland has confirmed this is real. He has confirmed a fan figured it out on Reddit and posted it. He has not confirmed what the secret is. The most widely accepted candidate theories are that Rick is an older version of Morty, or that Rick knows he's in a television show. Both theories have evidence. Neither has been confirmed. Fact 167. What is truly in Rick's flask remains canonically ambiguous. Roiland's two contradictory answers, he's just a connoisseur of all good liqueur, and we're not ready to discuss that yet, leave the door open. The megaseed theory is the most elegant explanation for multiple visual details across the series, including Rick's persistent slight drool, the urgency of his need for the seeds in the pilot, and the curious consistency of intelligence levels across Ricks from very different dimensional backgrounds. Fact 168. The identity of the Beth. Who is really Beth and the Beth who is really a clone has never been answered. The show confirmed that Rick designed the situation, so it was impossible to determine even for him. Both Space Beth and Earth Beth have had significant character development and emotional growth since the split. The show appears committed to never resolving this. In a strange way, this reflects the show's larger philosophy. The question of which version of a person is real may be unanswerable because reality might be constituted by something other than origin. Fact 169. The talking cat's backstory remains deliberately withheld. Rick saw it and was horrified enough to destroy the evidence. The show explicitly argued, through the episode's structure, that not every mystery deserves an answer, that some things are better left unexplained, because any explanation would be smaller than the anxiety the mystery produces. This is both a genuine philosophical position and a meta-comment on the dangers of over-theorizing a television show. Fact 170. What happened to Squanchy after Birdperson's wedding remains uncertain for a long time in the show. He transformed and fought the Federation soldiers to allow Rick and others to escape. His fate was left unresolved for multiple seasons. The uncertainty about his survival was a deliberate choice. The show wanted viewers to feel the weight of not knowing, which mirrors how real loss often operates. You don't always get a clear answer. Sometimes people just disappear into a fight, and you don't find out what happened. Fact 171. The nature of Rick's intelligence is explored, but never fully resolved. Is he the smartest being in the universe because of natural gifts? Because of the megaseeds? Because of cybernetic enhancements he's given himself? Because of some combination of all three? The show has provided evidence for several of these theories without committing to any. The ambiguity is protective. If the show fully explained why Rick is as intelligent as he is, it would diminish the quality of inexplicability that makes him feel genuinely extraordinary rather than just plotted. Fact 172. The question of whether any dimensions Rick and Morty are the real ones, whether our main Rick and Morty have any special claim on being the protagonist of their own universe, is left permanently open. As Rick has said directly that every version of him and Morty is equally real. The show follows Rick C-137 and Morty Prime because they happen to end up together, not because they are cosmically designated as the important ones. This is either a very democratic philosophical position or a deeply nihilistic one, depending on how you hold it. Fact 173. The show has hinted at events in Rick's past that have never been fully depicted. His years with Birdperson fighting the Galactic Federation, his relationship with Unity, his travels before he appeared at Beth's door. We have seen fragments, photographs, memories, brief flashbacks, but the full texture of those years remains unknown. The show treats Rick's past as a resource to draw from slowly rather than all at once, which is one of the reasons the character never feels fully exhausted. Fact 174. What happened between Rick and his original Morty, if he had one, is presented as a genuine canon mystery. We know Rick had a baby Morty in his possession. At some point, because photographs of this exist, We know he was supposedly absent from Beth's life for years before the series. We know Bird Person had photographic evidence connecting Rick to a Morty in the past. Whether this original Morty became evil Morty, or died, or is somewhere in the multiverse as an entirely separate person, remains one of the show's great unanswered questions. Fact 175. Following Rick Prime's death at Rick C. 137's hands in Season 7, Rick experienced something unexpected by depression. He had spent his entire adult life defined by the hunt for Rick Prime. His grief, his alcoholism, his nihilism, had his decision to stay with a Beth who was not his original daughter, all of it was organized around the goal of revenge. When the revenge was complete, Rick had to face a question he had never needed to answer before. What does Rick Sanchez want when there's nothing left to be angry about? Fact 176. The show has been explicitly renewed through Season 12, meaning there is at least 5 more seasons of Rick and Morty to come as of the time of writing. The full shape of where the remaining storylines will go, what happens to evil Morty beyond the central finite curve, what Rick becomes after the death of Rick Prime, whether Beth's identity question is ever resolved, what Morty grows into, remains entirely open. The show is, at this stage, an ongoing project that has been running for over a decade and intends to run for several more years. Fact 177. The number of universes in the Rick and Morty multiverse is described as infinite. Not large. Infinite. This means that somewhere in the show's cosmology, there exists a version of every story that could possibly be told. Every character death is followed somewhere by a dimension where it didn't happen. Every failed adventure succeeded in a parallel branch. Every missed connection was made in another version of the same moment. The show lives in a space where nothing is final, because the multiverse always offers another possibility. The writers use this to both explore consequences and occasionally to escape them. And the balance between those two uses is one of the ongoing negotiations that defines the show's moral texture. Fact 178. Rick and Morty is, at its deepest level, a show about grief. Rick grieves Diane. Beth grieves the father she lost before she could know him. Morty grieves the normality that was taken from him before he was old enough to understand what it was. Jerry grieves the version of himself that he was going to be before life went a different way. Summer grieves the belonging she never quite achieves. The show's science fiction and comedy exist in service of these grief stories, which is why it resonates the way it does. You don't need to understand quantum mechanics to understand the feeling of having lost something you can't get back and not knowing what to do with that loss. Everyone understands that. That's the actual joke the show is making. Underneath all the portals and aliens and Pickle Rick, it's just people trying to deal with the things that broke them. Fact 179. Rick's relationship with Morty is the most carefully protected and sustained relationship in the show's history. Rick has burned nearly every other bridge. His marriage to Diane ended in tragedy. His friendship with Bird Person was shattered by Tammy's betrayal. His relationship with Beth is defined by guilt and longing. His relationship with the Citadel is one of permanent warfare. But with Morty, despite every moment of using him, manipulating him, endangering him, and failing him, Rick keeps coming back. He keeps protecting him. He keeps choosing him. The relationship is imperfect and often painful and sometimes genuinely wrong, but it persists. It is the one relationship in Rick's life that his nihilism cannot fully neutralize, and the show knows it. Fact 180. Dan Harmon has described the series' ultimate message as, "We need to focus on human relationships and not preoccupy our minds with unanswerable questions in order to find a sense of purpose and live a better life." Rick cannot do this. That's why he's miserable despite being the smartest person in the universe. Morty is learning to do it. That's why he grows. The show's pedagogy is hidden inside a cartoon where a man turns himself into a pickle to avoid therapy. Fact 181. The show has occasionally told us, through Rick's own words and through the evidence of his actions, that Rick knows exactly what he's doing wrong and chooses to keep doing it. Dr. Wong told him, Bird Person told him, Beth told him, Summer told him, and even Morty has told him. He hears all of it. He even agrees with most of it. He simply cannot stop. And if you strip the science fiction away, this is the most recognizably human thing about a character who can travel between dimensions and outsmart governments. The capacity to understand your own damage and watch yourself perpetuate it anyway. Fact 182. The show's final statement, if it ever makes one, is likely to be something quiet rather than loud. The show has consistently built to its emotional revelations through restraint rather than explosion. The look on Rick's face when he thinks Morty is dead, the moment in his garage after Unity leaves, the scene where he buries himself in a backyard. The show earns its most important moments by not announcing them. When the show says something true, it tends to whisper it. Fact 183. But Rick and Morty began as a parody of a movie franchise and became one of the most emotionally complex long-form stories in animated television. The two characters started as crude exaggerations and became fully realized people with damage and love and fear and growth. The show started as something you watched to laugh and became something you watched to feel less alone in whatever it is you carry around that you don't know what to do with. Fact 184. Somewhere in the infinite multiverse of the show, there is a dimension where Rick chose differently, where he accepted Rick Prime's offer and abandoned his family, where he never lost Diane, where he never became this specific, broken, brilliant, desperate version of himself. The show knows this, Rick knows this, and somehow, the fact that he became who he is through grief rather than ambition is the thing that makes him worth following. Fact 185. And there are so many more things to know. There are background jokes in episodes that have only been spotted by a handful of people. There are audio details in scenes that have never been fully decoded. There are story decisions that the writers themselves have never fully explained. Because some of the best storytelling decisions are intuitive rather than analytical, which means they can be recognized and appreciated, but never fully translated into words. Fact 186. The show's approach to continuity has evolved significantly. Season 1 was largely episodic with a few connecting threads. Season 5 was, by Dan Harmon's own admission, the most experimental and divisive season, deliberately avoiding the large canonical arcs to test whether the audience would stay engaged with pure episode-by-episode storytelling. The audience's mixed response to Season 5 influenced the decision to return to more explicit mythology in Season 6. Fact 187. Rick's design has small details that have shifted across seasons. His posture has changed slightly. The blue tint in his hair has varied. The way his eyes express different emotions has been refined over time. Art director Jeffrey Thompson explained that the show's visual style guide instructs artists to draw the characters with deliberately odd or asymmetrical features, to prevent them from looking too normal to live in the Rick and Morty universe. The asymmetry and imperfection are built into the show's aesthetic as a philosophical commitment. Fact 188. While one of the show's most quietly subversive choices is to never fully redeem Jerry. Most television shows with a character in Jerry's position, the bumbling, frequently mocked, consistently underestimated figure, eventually engineer a moment of genuine triumph for him. A scene where he saves the day, earns respect, proves himself. Rick and Morty has resisted this almost entirely. Jerry gets small victories, occasional dignity, brief moments of competence. But he doesn't get the redemption arc. The show seems to suggest that some people aren't saved by one big moment. They're just who they are, and that's enough to deserve love. Fact 189. The production of each season of Rick and Morty takes considerably longer than most animated shows. The show's small, intensive writer's room and its commitment to story quality over production speed means that the gap between seasons has consistently been longer than viewer expectations. Harmon has said that rushing the show would be worse than the wait, and the general quality of the output suggests this is probably correct. Fact 190. The show has produced some genuinely innovative animation sequences. The fracturing reality of A Rickle in Time, the multidimensional city of the Citadel, the yellow portal sequence at the end of the Season 5 finale, that pushed the technical capabilities of Bardell Entertainment's team and required development of new techniques. The visual language of the show expanded with each season in ways that reflected the expanding ambition of its storytelling. Fact 191. The show's music, beyond the iconic theme, this includes a recurring use of musical choices that comment on or contrast with what's happening on screen. When Rick does something genuinely horrifying, the music sometimes continues light and pleasant. When something unexpectedly tender happens, the tone shifts to something quieter and less ironic. The relationship between sound and image in Rick and Morty is more carefully considered than casual viewing reveals. Fact 192. Rick and Morty has been described by various media critics as the show that best captures a specific early 21st century anxiety. The feeling of knowing too much about how the world works, of being unable to maintain the comfortable fictions that allow ordinary life to feel meaningful, while still desperately wanting the warmth of connection and belonging that ordinary life can provide. Rick is not a cautionary tale about intelligence. He is a cautionary tale about what happens when intelligence is used as armor against the vulnerabilities that make life worthwhile. Fact 193. The show's treatment of mental health, including Rick's alcoholism, his depression, his PTSD from Diane's murder, Morty's anxiety and accumulating trauma, Beth's decades of parental abandonment issues, is unusually honest for an animated comedy. The show does not pathologize these characters or treat their problems as quirks. It treats them as consequences of specific experiences and as things that require actual work to address, which most of the characters refuse to do, which is itself a very true observation about people. Fact 194. The dimension designated C-137, Rick's home, is kept in a time loop for decades by Rick before his return. Now, the dimension's inhabitants are trapped, not dead, but frozen in the same day over and over, unable to age or move forward. When Rick releases the loop, they are finally free to die. This is presented as a mercy. The show is saying that being trapped in a moment of grief indefinitely is worse than death, and that letting go, even of grief, even of the last connection to what you've lost, is something Rick was never able to do alone. Fact 195. The show's final message may be deceptively simple. In a universe of infinite possibilities, in a multiverse where every version of every story already exists, in a world where nothing has inherent meaning and intelligence is no protection against loss, the one thing that matters is the same thing it has always been. Whether you show up for the people who need you to show up. Now, Rick almost never does. Morty usually does, even when it terrifies him. The difference between them is not intelligence. It's courage of the specific kind that has nothing to do with bravery in crisis and everything to do with the small, daily, terrifying choice to remain present for someone else's pain. Fact 196. The universe of Rick and Morty will continue expanding for at least 5 more seasons. The questions that remain will be answered slowly, and some may never be answered at all. New mysteries will be planted. New characters will emerge from the infinite possibilities of a multiverse that was designed from the beginning to never run out of stories. The show will keep asking the same fundamental questions it's always asked. What is the point of it all? What do you owe the people you love? What happens to a person when they know too much? What is courage when you understand exactly how meaningless the universe is? And it will keep offering the same quiet, buried, easily missed answer. Maybe the point is each other. Maybe that's enough. Maybe the only way to survive knowing everything about how cold and indifferent the cosmos is to be the warmth in your specific corner of it for the specific people who are unlucky enough to need your warmth. Maybe that's the whole thing. Maybe that's all there is to know. Take a breath. Let that last thought settle wherever it's comfortable. You've been traveling for a while tonight, through origin stories and animation software, through the science of wormholes and the philosophy of despair, through Easter eggs hidden in background frames and fan theories that rewrote the way the show felt to watch, through the grief of a man who loved his wife, and through the love of a boy who kept choosing to be afraid because he knew that fear was what kept him human. All of that is still there in the show. All those small facts and quiet details and carefully planted mysteries. They'll be there whenever you want them again. For now, though, the garage is quiet, the portal gun is on the workbench, the green glow has gone out. Rest well. Part 11. The episodes themselves. A closer look. Slow your breathing down a little more. We're going into individual episodes now, some of the most celebrated ones and some of the overlooked ones, holding each one up to the light for a moment before setting it back down. Fact 197. Me Seeks and Destroy, Season 1, Episode 5, introduces the Mr. Meeseeks concept that became one of the show's most enduring creations. But it also contains a genuinely dark B-plot involving a fairy tale kingdom that Morty wants to explore. The adventure Morty leads in this episode ends in failure, reinforcing one of the show's early thematic statements. Optimism isn't a reliable guide, and Morty's instinct to believe things will work out is not always validated. The episode treats Morty's failure with respect. It doesn't mock him for trying, but it doesn't let him off the hook for the consequences either. Fact 198. Rick's Minutes, Season 1, Episode 8, is sometimes described as the show's first genuinely great episode. Now, the interdimensional cable concept, Rick hooking the family television up to receive broadcasts from other dimensions, allowed for improvised comedy at a scale that the show had not previously attempted. But the B-plot, in which Summer and Morty watch versions of themselves from alternate dimensions, living vastly different lives, is entirely separate in tone and contains one of the most honest scenes in the show's history. Morty telling Summer that nobody exists on purpose, nobody belongs anywhere, and that they might as well watch TV. This was the first time the show demonstrated it could use comedy as scaffolding for something genuinely profound. Fact 199. Rick Potion Number 9, Season 1, Episode 6, is the episode that fundamentally changed what Rick and Morty was. Before it, the show was capable of darkness. But the darkness was managed, things resolved, the stakes returned to manageable. In this episode, Rick's attempt to make Morty a love potion goes catastrophically wrong, mutating first Jessica, then the entire school, then the entire world. Rick's attempts to fix it create successively larger disasters, ending with him being unable to reverse the damage at all. His solution is to escape to a parallel dimension where another Rick succeeded, meaning they must bury their own dead bodies in a backyard and quietly take over their dead counterparts' lives. The episode ends with Morty sitting on a couch in a house that is technically his and technically not, with a family that technically knows him and technically doesn't, having just helped bury himself. The show was never quite the same after this. Fact 200, i.e. Autoerotic Assimilation, Season 2, Episode 3, features Rick reuniting with Unity, the hive mind entity, in what becomes the show's most extended treatment of Rick's romantic and emotional life. The episode contains the infamous post-credits sequence in which Rick, alone in his garage after Unity has left, tries to use a device to harm himself. The attempt fails when he passes out drunk before it can complete. This sequence is genuinely dark and was included deliberately to show that Rick's nihilism is not a philosophical position. It is the symptom of a man in enormous pain. The show played no music under this scene, it just showed it and then cut to black. Fact 201. Total Recall, Season 2, Episode 4, is Dan Harmon's personal favorite episode according to multiple sources. The memory parasite premise allowed the show to produce an episode that is genuinely funny, genuinely creepy, and genuinely emotionally illuminating. The revelation that it's possible to identify the real people from the fake ones by finding a bad memory of them forces the characters to admit to each other what they actually remember about their shared lives, which turns out to contain a lot of conflict and resentment alongside the love. It's a more realistic portrait of a family than most television attempts. Fact 202. Get Swifty, Season 2, Episode 5, is the episode in which Rick and Morty are required to write a hit song for a giant alien head threatening to destroy Earth if the planet cannot entertain it sufficiently. The episode contains the song Get Swifty, which became one of the show's most recognizable musical moments. The song was improvised by Justin Roiland and Ryan Elder in the recording session. It is not a carefully crafted composition, it is a man shouting semi-coherent party sounds into a microphone and seeing what worked. The fact that this became a beloved cultural artifact says something genuinely interesting about the relationship between sincerity and artistry. Fact 203. The Wedding Squanchers, Season 2 finale, ends with Rick surrendering himself to the Galactic Federation to save his family. The episode features Bird Person's wedding, Tammy's betrayal, Rick's arrest, and Bird Person's apparent death. It also ends with the Federation occupying Earth and Jerry receiving a government job, which the show depicts as genuinely satisfying for Jerry. He thrives under authoritarian stability because the authoritarianism removes the pressure of independent decision-making, which Jerry was never suited for. This detail about Jerry is delivered without comment and without judgment, which makes it both funnier and sadder than if the show had explicitly flagged it. Fact 204. The Rick Shank Rickdemption Season 3 premiere was released without any promotion on April Fool's Day 2017. The episode features Rick escaping from the Galactic Federation's maximum security prison by transferring his consciousness into multiple bodies, dismantling the Federation's economy by destroying the value of their currency, and then collapsing the Citadel of Ricks. All while the entire sequence is framed as Rick giving a deliberately false memory to a Federation agent. It is one of the most densely plotted 22 minutes of television the show has produced, and it introduced the Szechuan sauce as the culminating note of Rick's villain monologue. Fact 205. Pickle Rick, Season 3, Episode 3, has been extensively analyzed as the show's most layered episode. On the surface, it is a comedy about a man who turns himself into a vegetable to avoid therapy. Underneath it is an action episode in which Rick fights his way through a government facility by building increasingly advanced tools from the corpses of insects and rodents. And underneath that is a therapy session in which a psychiatrist tells Rick everything that is wrong with him, ut in clinical and compassionate terms, and Rick both hears every word and refuses to change anything. The three layers of the episode operate simultaneously throughout the runtime, which is a technical achievement that rivals anything the show has done. Fact 206. The ABCs of Beth, Season 3, Episode 9, reveals that Rick built Beth an entire imaginary world called Fruppyland when she was a child, populated with creatures he invented specifically for her. The episode then reveals that Beth may have trapped a childhood friend in Fruppyland as a child and left them there. This backstory is deployed both for horror comedy and as evidence that Beth's capacity for darker behavior has always been present, suppressed beneath her suburban life, and is directly connected to the creativity and ruthlessness she inherited from Rick. But the episode ends with Rick offering Beth the choice that defines the rest of her arc. Fact 207. Morty's Mind Blowers, Season 3, Episode 8, is a clip show made of clips you've never seen. The premise is that Rick has been erasing memories from Morty's mind for years and storing them in a cabinet in his lab. The episode shows us dozens of these erased experiences, revealing an entire undocumented history of their adventures. Several of these lost memories are as consequential as anything that happened in named episodes. The episode ends with both Rick and Morty having wiped their own memories by accident, requiring Summer to reset them from a manual she has memorized from experience. The episode says a great deal about the relationship between memory and self, and about Summer's silent, long-suffering competence. Fact 208. The Ricklantis Mix-Up, Season 3, Episode 7, which was discussed earlier as widely considered one of the finest Delight episodes, contains a subplot about a Rick police officer who begins to sympathize with the Morty population he's supposed to police and ultimately cannot bring himself to execute a Morty who did nothing wrong. His small moral stand is suppressed immediately by the system. His arc ends not in redemption, but in institutional erasure. It is the most explicitly political subplot the show has run, and it is embedded inside an episode that most viewers remember primarily for the evil Morty reveal. Fact 209. Star Mort Rickturn of the Jerry, Season 4 finale, that introduces Spacebeth and forces the family to confront the clone question, while also featuring a genuinely thrilling action sequence involving Beth and Spacebeth working together. The episode's emotional center is the relationship between two versions of the same person, who have both, through different paths, arrived at genuine competence and genuine love for their family. The question of which one is real becomes irrelevant in the face of the fact that both of them are choosing the same things. Fact 210. Unmortrican, Season 7, Episode 5, features Rick finally catching and killing Rick Prime with the unexpected assistance of evil Morty. It is one of the most cathartic episodes in the show's history and also one of the most emotionally complicated. Rick's revenge is complete, but it brings nothing like peace. Rick Prime mocks Rick to the last, and when it's over, Rick does not feel better. He feels the hollow absence of the thing that gave his pain direction. The episode is a quiet meditation on revenge as a solution to grief, and on the discovery that it isn't. Part 12. Connections, Callbacks, and the Long Game. This is the last section. Let everything slow down. These are the threads that run longest through the show, the things that reward watching it more than once, the connections that make it feel designed rather than assembled. Fact 211. The show has a very careful approach to the physical state of the Smith family house. Damage to the house from one episode is typically visible in subsequent episodes, even when characters don't acknowledge it. This is a quiet commitment to the idea that actions have consequences that persist even when the story has moved on. Fact 212. Rick's spaceship has a personality. The ship's AI is present and emotionally responsive across multiple episodes. The ship expresses jealousy, protectiveness, and genuine affection toward Rick. At one point, the ship refers to having Diane's voice, suggesting it was programmed in part from Rick's memory of his wife. This connection was confirmed in later seasons. Rick is surrounded by things he has built to remind him of what he's lost. Fact 213. The Vindicators, despite being introduced partly as a parody of superhero teams, contain a genuinely emotionally complex character in Morty Knight, the team's Morty equivalent. His arc in the episode mirrors what the show is doing with our Morty, examining what it means to be the seemingly less capable partner in a famous duo. Fact 214. Rick's comment in the Season 1 pilot about wanting to see an 11-minute board-driven show about intelligent dogs references not only the failed Dog World pilot, but also a very specific frustration with how networks think about animation. The joke works on multiple levels simultaneously, as an in-show character quirk, as an in-universe inside joke, and as a commentary on the difficulty of getting unconventional animated ideas made. Fact 215. The show's treatments of mental health have improved in specificity over its run. Early seasons used Rick's alcoholism and depression as character flavor, but later seasons treat them as documented damage with specific causes and persistent consequences. The shift mirrors a broader cultural evolution in how mental health is discussed and suggests the show's writers have done more thinking about these subjects as the show matured. Fact 216. Morty's recurring love interest. Jessica has a name that echoes Morty's initial presentation as an ordinary teenager in love with a girl he can't talk to. But over the course of the series, Jessica becomes aware of Morty in increasingly significant ways. She can tell something is different about him, that he has been changed by things she can't see. Their relationship exists in the space between the ordinary life Morty wishes he had and the extraordinary life he keeps being dragged through. Fact 217. But Rick has a habit of naming things based on what they do rather than giving them proper names. Portal gun, Meeseeks box, the Brainalyzer. This is consistent with a person who is focused on utility rather than attachment. Rick doesn't name things because naming suggests you expect to keep them. Fact 218. The show has occasionally depicted what would happen if Rick genuinely tried to be a good grandfather. Moments of genuine warmth and instruction where Rick shares something real with Morty without any ulterior motive. These scenes are relatively rare and they always end quickly, which makes them more valuable rather than less. The show understands that genuine connection for Rick is something that happens in spite of him rather than because of him. Fact 219. Jerry has a recurring pattern of getting small moments of competence or dignity that are immediately neutralized by subsequent events. The show gives him just enough to prevent him from being entirely pathetic, then takes it back. This rhythm is so consistent that it begins to look like the show's argument about Jerry. He is not incapable of being good at things, but he lives in circumstances that consistently overwhelm the gap between his aspirations and his abilities. Fact 220. Beth's relationship with her own potential is one of the show's quieter ongoing stories. She is objectively a skilled surgeon. The fact that she practices on horses rather than humans reflects choices made under duress, not absence of talent. In seasons where Beth gets to demonstrate genuine competence and intelligence, the show seems to be suggesting that the life she built out of circumstance has been hiding a person who was always capable of more than that life required. Fact 221. Rick's relationship with religion and the concept of God is interesting and consistent. He has said directly that his God is the biggest dick that's never existed. He has defeated Satan. He has outwitted metaphysical beings. The show suggests that Rick's atheism and his contempt for cosmic order come from a specific place. He believes he has seen enough of how the universe actually works to know that no benevolent intelligence is running it. His nihilism is not philosophical detachment. It's the conclusion of a person who looked too closely at the machinery and found it indifferent. Fact 222. The show has portrayed Rick engaging in behavior that would be, in a realistic context, deeply concerning, but then ask the audience to stay with the character anyway. This is the show's most difficult and most important creative choice. Rick is not presented as a role model. He is presented as a person. The show asks you to understand him without endorsing him, which is a sophisticated request and one that the show has generally honored by never letting him fully off the hook. Fact 223. The fact that both Rick and Morty are voiced by the same person for the show's first 6 seasons is both a technical choice and a thematic one. If Rick and Morty are in some way the same person at different stages of life, or if they represent two halves of a single consciousness, the intellectual and the emotional, the experienced and the innocent, then having one voice carry both of them is a quiet structural statement about how inseparable they are. Fact 224. The central finite curve's destruction at the end of Season 5 represents a permanent structural change to the show's universe. The multiverse is now larger. The part of it that the show can explore has expanded beyond the dimensions where Rick is automatically the smartest being. What this means for the show going forward is genuinely unknown. The show opened a door in its 5th season finale that it will spend subsequent seasons walking through. Fact 225. Rick Prime's Omega device, the weapon that erased Diane from every dimension, represents a kind of loss that is philosophically distinct from normal death. Normal death leaves memory, leaves people who grieve, leaves evidence of existence. The Omega device erased Diane so thoroughly that even the people who loved her have difficulty fully remembering her. Only Rick C. 137's grief tells the story of what was lost. This is a very specific kind of horror, the erasure of a person from the record of the universe. Fact 226. Morty's arc across the series is, in the gentlest possible description, the arc of a child being exposed to too much, too fast, and having to decide what kind of person he wants to be in response. The show is genuinely concerned about this arc. It is not celebrating the damage. The moments when Morty becomes harder, more callous, more capable of violence without distress are consistently framed as losses rather than growth. The show loves Morty's anxiety. It is the thing that keeps him human. Fact 227. Summer's arc is less celebrated but equally significant. She goes from a teenager performing indifference to a person capable of genuine competence and genuine care. Her journey is about earning a place in a world that didn't initially have space for her, not through extraordinary gifts or cosmic destiny, but through showing up and refusing to accept that she wasn't needed. Fact 228. Beth's arc is about learning to want what she actually has rather than what she believes she deserves. This is a quieter kind of growth than dramatic transformation, and the show presents it with appropriate uncertainty. Beth hasn't fully arrived anywhere. She is still in the middle of becoming. Fact 229. Jerry's arc is perhaps the most honest portrait of someone who doesn't change significantly and is nevertheless loved anyway. Jerry does not have a revelation. He does not become more than he is. He occasionally gets access to small dignities and briefly recognizes them before losing them again. What the show does with Jerry is suggest that being loved by the people who know you best, with all your mediocrity intact, is not a lesser version of love. It might be the most real version. Fact 230. The show has consistently returned to the idea that every adventure Rick and Morty have costs something. The cosmic nihilism of the Rick and Morty universe is balanced against the show's insistence on consequence. Things that happen matter, even when Rick pretends they don't. The garage with its continuing dents and patches, the slowly accumulating damage in Morty's expression, as the quietly deepening circles under Rick's eyes, all of it is the show's evidence that its universe is real, and that real things leave marks. Fact 231. Rick and Morty has been on the air for over a decade as of the mid-2020s. The characters have not aged visually, as is the convention in most animated shows, but they have aged in every way that matters, in the accumulated weight of their experiences, in the slow evolution of how they speak to each other, in the depth of the silence that sits between them when they are not talking. Time passes in Rick and Morty. It just doesn't show on anyone's face. Fact 232. The show has never had a proper series finale, and it is not close to one. There are at least several seasons remaining, and the mythology that has been built suggests multiple more major revelations to come. But whatever the show's ending looks like, whenever and however it comes, the foundation it has built suggests it will be earned. Fact 233. Rick has never fully apologized to Morty for everything he's put him through. He has acknowledged it obliquely, gestured at it in moments of unguarded tenderness, given it back through protection and occasional genuine care. But the direct apology, the sitting down and saying, "I understand what I've done and I'm sorry," that hasn't happened. Some viewers consider this a failure of the show. Others consider it the most realistic thing about it. Real damage in real relationships almost never gets the clean closure of a formal apology. It just accumulates, and you either keep choosing each other anyway or you don't. Fact 234. The Morty in our story keeps choosing anyway. Not despite knowing how broken Rick is, but with full awareness of it. This is the most loving thing any character in the show does, and the show knows it, and it leaves it there without fanfare. Fact 235. Rick and Morty are, at their core, two people who should not work as companions. A man too old and too smart and too damaged to be present, and a boy too young and too afraid and too empathetic to be safe, and who somehow work anyway. The show cannot fully explain why. Neither can the characters. The relationship persists anyway, which is how the best relationships tend to work. They don't require explanation. They require showing up. Fact 236. The show's title sequence changes occasionally in subtle ways across seasons. Small visual details in the action sequences shift. Characters appear in different positions. Background elements are updated to reflect events in the most recent season. Watching the title sequences of different seasons back to back reveals how much the show's visual language evolved, even within the familiar form of the opening credits. Fact 237. Rick's burp is more than a vocal tic. The show has established that Rick's stomach issues, the source of the burps, are at least partly connected to his emotional state. When Rick is under particular stress, or when the burping is especially prominent, attentive viewers have noted correlations with emotionally significant scenes. Whether this is intentional or interpretive is left to the viewer. Fact 238. The show has produced several episodes that work as complete, self-contained short films, stories that could stand alone outside the series' context without any prior knowledge of the characters. The Ricklantis mix-up is the clearest example. Pickle Rick comes close. The ability to produce standalone cinematic quality within an episodic animated format is one of the show's most impressive technical achievements. Fact 239. Rick and Morty's villains, as a category, are among the most varied and interesting in animated television. They range from the petty and bureaucratic, the Galactic Federation, to the personal and intimate, Rick Prime, to the accidentally created, the Cronenberg Mutants, to the genuinely sympathetic, evil Morty. No two villains share the same origin, motivation, or relationship with the protagonist. The show has consistently treated its antagonists as people who have understandable reasons for what they do, even when those reasons are terrible. Fact 240. The show's treatment of its own influence and success has been sometimes uncomfortable and sometimes genuinely funny. Rick has given speeches that are clearly about the show's own fan base. The people who think the show validates their cynicism, who use its nihilism as permission not to grow. The show does not endorse this reading of itself. Rick is not a role model. The show has said this in various ways across every season. The audience has sometimes disagreed. Fact 241. One of the most discussed background details across the entire show is the recurring presence of a particular alien creature in interdimensional scenes. Small, pink and blue, doing nothing significant, present in nearly every portal sequence. It is never named, never acknowledged, never given any story relevance. It is simply there, persistently, across hundreds of minutes of footage, as if the multiverse has a mascot that nobody introduced you to. Fact 242. Rick and Morty is objectively a show about a very small family navigating a very large universe. The intimacy of the family drama and the scale of the cosmological adventure are in constant, productive tension, and the show never fully resolves that tension because the resolution would remove the source of the show's energy. The family's smallness against the universe's vastness is not a problem to be fixed. It's the whole point. Fact 243. The show has been at its best when it commits completely to both registers at once, when the science fiction is fully realized and the family drama is fully felt at the same time, neither one subordinated to the other. Episodes that abandon one for the other tend to be the ones that feel less complete. The show's greatest achievement is those moments when the entire infinite multiverse is the backdrop for a grandfather choosing to protect his grandson, or a daughter realizing she loves her terrible father. Anyway, fact 244. Rick Sanchez is one of the most complex characters in animated television history. He is brilliant and broken and funny and terrifying and sad, and occasionally genuine in his warmth. He is worth the 11 or more seasons the show intends to spend with him. And the fact that the show is willing to commit to his damage, to not fix him, to not redeem him neatly, to let him be exactly what he is the choice that made him real. Fact 245. Morty Smith is the show's moral center in the specific sense that he has one, a moral center, and most of the other characters don't, or have lost theirs along the way. He is often scared, often wrong, often manipulated, often damaged. But he keeps trying to do the right thing, keeps feeling the weight of things, keeps caring about the people around him, even when caring costs him enormously. This is described by the show not as heroism, but as something quieter and more durable. Decency, maintained under pressure. Fact 246. The show began with a parody of a franchise about time travel and adventure and a charismatic older mentor and his younger companion. But it evolved into something that took the emotional core of that premise, the relationship between someone who knows too much and someone who is still learning, and explored it honestly without the escapism that Back to the Future allowed itself. The show did not let Rick be Doc Brown. Doc Brown is benevolent and ultimately harmless. Rick is something more difficult to hold on to. Fact 247. Rick and Morty has done something relatively rare in popular entertainment. It has taken nihilism seriously as a philosophical position, examined it honestly, found it convincing, and then quietly suggested that even if it is correct, it is not sufficient. The universe may have no inherent meaning. That doesn't mean you don't owe your grandson a reason to keep showing up. Fact 248. The show has suggested across its run that Rick's greatest invention is not the portal gun. It is not the microverse battery or the neural helmets or the brainalyzer. It might be Morty himself, or rather, the version of Morty that has been shaped by years of adventures and damage and imperfect love into someone capable of more than the frightened, uncertain kid who first climbed into a spaceship, not really understanding what he was agreeing to. Fact 249. The show has never answered the question of what the best version of Rick would look like. It has shown us versions of Rick who are happier, who are more controlled, who are more social. But it has never shown us a Rick who is fully well, because the show understands that what made Rick who he is also made him capable of everything he has done and built and discovered. The grief and the genius are not separable in him. You cannot take out one and leave the other intact. Fact 250. This show, born from a crude internet parody of a 1985 film, has become one of the most thoughtful, most carefully constructed, most emotionally ambitious animated programs of its era. It has smuggled philosophy into comedy and grief into adventure and love into nihilism, and it has done all of this without ever once telling you directly that that's what it was doing. It has trusted you to notice. Fact 251. There are facts about Rick and Morty that haven't been discussed yet tonight. There are always more. The show has been running for over a decade and has been examined by millions of people with enormous care, and still people find things they haven't seen before on rewatches. Still background details emerge. Still implications of lines of dialogue take on new weight in the context of what came after them. The show was built to keep revealing itself. Fact 252. Rick once said in the Season 2 premiere, "Having a family doesn't mean that you stop being an individual." He said this partly as a justification for his behavior, and partly perhaps as something he was trying to convince himself of. The tension in that sentence between the freedom of individuality and the obligation of belonging is the tension that runs under every single episode of the show. Rick wants to be an individual more than he wants almost anything, and yet he keeps coming back to the family. Fact 253. Morty has said at the end of Season 1, "Nobody exists on purpose, nobody belongs anywhere, everybody's going to die. Come watch TV." This is delivered as both nihilism and comfort, as the acknowledgement that the universe's indifference might be a reason to stop worrying about cosmic significance and simply be here, now, with the person beside you. It is, without any irony, one of the most genuinely consoling lines in the show's entire run. Fact 254. The show makes you laugh and then makes you think about why you laughed. It makes you sad and then reveals that the sadness was hiding something funny. It makes you feel small in the face of infinite universes and then reminds you that small things are allowed to matter. This is what it has been doing consistently for over a decade, and there's no reason to think it will stop. Fact 255. Rick Sanchez, at some point in almost every season, does something that cannot be justified, cannot be excused, and is followed by the show's camera staying on his face for a moment, just long enough for you to see something there. Not remorse, exactly. Not shame. Something more private. The recognition of a person who knows what he's doing and does it anyway, and carries that knowledge forward with him into the next thing. The show never names what this is. It just shows you his face. Fact 256, Morty Smith, at some point in almost every season, does something brave. Not the obviously dramatic kind of brave, but the specific kind that requires him to be afraid first and then act anyway, to reach for something despite the shaking in his hands. The show is very careful to always show the shaking hands first. Without the shaking hands, the reaching is just movement. With them, it is courage. Fact 257. The show will continue. New voices are in the characters now. New writers are in the room. The mythological threads that have been running since Season 1 are still running. The questions that were planted are still unanswered. Evil Morty is out beyond the central finite curve. Rick has killed his nemesis and doesn't know what to do with the silence. Morty keeps growing in ways that surprise everyone, including himself. Beth is figuring out which version of her life she actually wants. Jerry persists. Summer keeps demanding to be included. Fact 258. The show's greatest achievement may be the simplest thing it ever did. It made you care about a mean drunk genius and a frightened teenager and asked you to stay with them through everything. Through the Cronenbergs and the Parasites, and the wedding and the Citadel and the Omega device and the Yellow Portal. And you did. You stayed, because somewhere along the way, despite all the nihilism, despite all the cosmic indifference, despite the infinite multiverse making every individual seem meaningless, you cared what happened to them. And the show knew you would. Because caring is not a weakness, not in any universe, not in any dimension, not in any version of the story. Caring is the whole point. It always was. Fact 259. Wubba lubba dub dub. In bird person's language, I'm in great pain, please help me. Fact 260. Thus, the show's response to that, over 13 plus years, has been to keep telling the story. To keep finding new things to say. To keep asking the big questions and refusing to answer them easily. To keep letting Rick be broken and Morty be afraid and Beth be complicated and Jerry be himself and Summer be more than anyone expected. Fact 261. That is in itself a kind of answer. Not to the big questions, not about the meaning of the universe or the nature of consciousness or the ethics of interdimensional travel, but to the small, personal, unbearably important question of whether the pain of being alive is worth the moments of being genuinely, unexpectedly, completely here. The show says yes, quietly, through everything it does. The show says yes, and that's where we'll leave it tonight. 261 facts, mysteries, and hidden details and quiet truths from a show about a drunk grandfather and a frightened boy traveling the infinite multiverse and finding it, despite everything, worth exploring. The garage light is off. The portal gun is quiet. Somewhere in an infinite number of other dimensions, other versions of this conversation are happening, some shorter, some longer, some in languages that don't have words for half of what we said tonight. But this is the one you got in the dimension you're in on this particular night. That's not nothing. That's actually everything there is. Sleep well. And thank you genuinely for spending this time here. If this kept you company tonight, a like and a subscribe would mean a great deal, and it helps us keep making things worth listening to. Rest well, and we'll see you in the next one.